Hi. Hi, guys. It's skycat.live. How are you? It is 1 in the morning on January 19, 2024. That is a Friday morning. And I just finished a 4.5 hour singing shift on Twitch. And now I'm going to finish up the day playing some New World, FFXI, and EvE. And so let us see. Zeolites, right? Zeolites. Forget. Yep, Zeolites. Gotta fucking save. Or not save, but show info. Zeolites. What crystal for Zeolites? Yeah, these guys, they bailed out, huh? Okay, well, zeolites. I don't know. Zeolites and bitumens. I need moon ore, so we're just gonna look in the market for moon stuff. Moon, which will be like structure equipment, no ammunition and charges. That's moon, common moon mining crystal type A. I think it is. Two jumps away. There's 16 for sale. 450,000 at Geesis. Moon mining crystals type A1. Let's look at it and make sure. Titanite and ski light. Uh, it's ubiquitous. Sylvite. No, it's ubiquitous, right? I wonder if I can find in contracts too, maybe. I need moon crystals. Yeah. Okay, well, so I guess I better go duck up. And I will go find moon
Warp
crystals,
drive
I guess.
active.
I don't know where the closest one will even be. How? Okay, whatever. I guess I will have to go all the way to Jita? I don't know. Don't know why I'm not selling this.
Docking request accepted.
Alright, well, I will have to. I could clone jump and then come back here. That is one way to do this. And just bring it back here, yeah, and then just jump to the clone when I get back to the station. That's one way to do it. Cut like a really big journey. I don't know. Let's take some stuff to market, I guess. I'll take like a catalyst, yeah. And I'll just fit whatever I can fit. Yeah, we'll put this in the catalyst. Yeah, those I'll sell them when I get there. Nothing really else that needs to go really. I don't think, anyways. Can always just put that in there to fit it. Four of them, sure, whatever. Make active, and we'll take this back to Jita. I guess it's unfortunate. It's a long fucking journey. See that Mac that I had, yeah, like extreme fishing, moon. Yeah, I need a fitting for moon mining. And yep. So I guess we'll go undock. I need to go get crystals. I guess. So take me to Jita. Alright, fucking 100. I have to do 100 jumps for this, but yeah.
Autopilot engaged.
That's okay. It's got to be done, or whatever.
Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
Or I don't know. Let's see what heck is, right? You could probably get them in heck. I'm out in Amar, which is Amar. Let's see how far Amar is. That's actually probably a better bet. Eight jumps. Never mind.
Autopilot disabled. Autopilot engaged.
Take me to that. I had a change. They'll have what I want in Amar. I'm fairly sure.
Approaching Stargate.
Yeah, that's better. Doing better. And then we'll get oh, I will drop the big face now. Sorry, guys. Just there we go. Distracted. Okay. And yeah, and so it was good. I got a singing session, so I'm just trying to get it all running and everything. So yeah, we will play some New World. As you can see, it's playing pretty well.
Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active. Approaching Stargate. Autopilot jumping. Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
Oh yeah. What's that? Oh, gathering luck, yeah. So we need to use our vittles.
Approaching Stargate. Autopilot jumping. Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active. Approaching Stargate.
Okay, how's that going? Good. Okay, we are in it. I want to watch YouTube videos today. I think it's gonna be a kind of be a low
Autopilot
energy
jumping.
stream after all that singing and everything. So you did try Power World, huh? Yeah, I don't think so.
Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active. Approaching Stargate.
I have to make a password for, another thing I have to sign up for, and it drains my every week. There's another thing I have to make a password for, another thing I have to sign up for, and it drains my bank account, and I'm just so sick of it.
This is Will. Will is upset because streaming services are
Autopilot
progressively becoming
jumping.
more and more like cable television. Do you feel like Will?
It makes me furious. Sorry to cut you off, but it makes me furious.
Do you hate rising prices?
If you want to watch those shows, you have to give them $7.
Warping to Stargate.
Do you
Warp
wish you
drive
had more
active.
control over your streaming service?
Everything used to be all on one platform.
Do you hate that ads are making a comeback?
It now is becoming even worse than cable television.
If you share any of those frustrations, then come along with me. I went off on a journey, and I've come back with this video, discussing things from the present day, to the history, to the technology and regulation that surrounds streaming, in order to answer the question, why in the hell would streaming just become cable
Approaching
television again?
Stargate.
It makes me so... It makes me furious.
When people say that streaming has become more like cable, I think they're generally referring to three key features of cable television that streaming once promised to free us from, only to recreate them in the last handful of years. First is that prices are rising. Streaming was originally introduced to households across the world as a single
Autopilot
affordable
jumping.
monthly plan that, for just a few bucks a month, would get them access to all the content they could ever want to watch. In recent years, though, prices have ballooned. Look at Netflix, for example, which has seen prices double across almost every plan. Their standard streaming
Warping
plan,
to
which was
Stargate.
introduced at $8 a
Warp
month,
drive
will now run you
active.
$16, and the premium plan, which cost just $12 as recently as 2016, will now run you $22.99 a month at the end of 2023. It's worth noting that both of those price increases also well outpace inflation over the same time periods. And if it feels like price increases are becoming more and more common, it's because they are. Price increases have become the norm across platforms, seen here for all major streaming services across their most recent price hike, which averaged a 21% increase.
Approaching
If you were to have
Stargate.
all of these streaming services, you'd end up like the 1 in 4 Americans who are paying more for streaming than the average cable cost. For those that think that that direct comparison isn't fair, I'll admit that you might be onto something. Deloitte found, for instance, that the average millennial pays just $54 a month for streaming, which is cheaper than the average cable cost. However, you have to keep in mind that that statistic doesn't take into account individual rentals, like a $4 movie on Amazon every once in a while, or the cost that you pay to
Autopilot
your ISP
jumping.
to access the high-speed internet that makes streaming possible. And we shouldn't expect price hikes to stop anytime soon, as streaming services are all racing towards profitability, experiencing billion-dollar losses in some cases. As of
Autopilot
2022,
disabled.
just Netflix and Hulu are profitable, which means that younger
Autopilot
services like
engaged.
Max and Disney Plus,
Warping
both
to
founded in
Stargate.
2019,
Warp drive
still have
active.
a bit of a ways to go before they make shareholders happy. As one firm put it, the era of streamflation is here, and we shouldn't expect these price increases to be a mere flash in the pan, given the surrounding economic circumstances. So, the era of cheap streaming is dead, or at the very least, dying. But surely all of those extra costs come with the modern benefits of streaming, right? Any show I want at the touch of a button. right? Well, maybe not. In some very important ways, I think that
Approaching
consumers are actually
Stargate.
losing some of the control that they once had. Streaming once promised eternal access to a large catalog of content wherever we went, a kind of digital frontier for freedom. However, changes in licensing, ownership, and permissions are threatening to reduce that control across the board. Let's start with licensing. Generally, if a service doesn't own a piece of media, then they pay a licensing fee to the owner in order to stream it on their platform. This can be a really big expense though, and after price hikes, removing titles is the
Autopilot
best way
jumping.
for a streaming service to reduce their overall costs. What this ends up meaning is that if a show doesn't drive enough retention,
Autopilot
engagement, or new
disabled.
subscriptions,
Waypoint
then
reached.
platforms are really likely to just stop paying to carry it, and you will lose access to something that you once had. And this is compounded by increasing media concentration through mergers and acquisitions. Disney, for example, now owns Hulu and ESPN and ABC and Fox and Lucasfilm and Marvel and Pixar and National Geographic and my house, probably. Amazon owns MGM, and don't even get me started on Warner Bros. Discovery. I think that is the stupidest company name since Keurig Dr. Pepper. As companies merge and acquire one another, ownership of individual properties changes, meaning that they move between services more often, or they go to a new service that exists as the consequence of a merger or acquisition. And this often results in you needing to pay more money to access the same content you once had control over. Infinity War, for example, used to be on Netflix, but it's now on Disney+. Friends used to be on Netflix, but now you need Max to see that. Titles leaving Netflix has become so passé that there are entire blogs run by some guy you went to college with dedicated to tracking this stuff. Similarly, the merger that led to the creation of Max saw many titles, some of which were streaming originals, disappear from the platform entirely, going to other services where you have to pay to rent them. Now, keep in mind, these weren't particularly heavy-hitting titles, but what happens if something a little bigger than Yabba Dabba Dinosaurs becomes unavailable? And even if the titles that we want are on a platform that we pay to access, our control over them can still be limited by changes in permissions. Who could forget the Netflix password sharing crackdown, which saw Netflix totally rewrite the script on what streaming services were supposed to be? By limiting the number of places that you can use your Netflix account, Netflix just declared that streaming was no longer going to be a frontier for digital freedom. You can no
Thank you,
Active.
Dummy, for the excellent content from a stream. I'd like to sub to your channel.
longer easily share with your kids at college or long distance partner or really anyone outside a traditional nuclear family without incurring extra costs. And it should be noted that other platforms like Disney Plus are already poised to follow suit. Once pitched as a liberation from clunky, antiquated cable, streaming has now started to reinvent the wheel on restricting access to content.
Docking permission
All right,
requested.
but that is
Docking
the prices
request
are a little
accepted.
bit higher, and the access is a little bit worse than it once was. But please, just at least tell me that we aren't going to have the worst part of cable come back, right? Please tell me that we aren't going to have advertising is back. Though it once seemed we had reached a post-ad media ecosystem thanks to streaming, we are now all too familiar with lengthy advertising segments, even when we already pay for a subscription. Ad-supported plans have started popping up, and though they're cheaper, they have ads, which is obviously fucking awful and horrifying. Like, I can't even begin to explain to you the existential dread that I feel when listening to this Whopper commercial. Why did they say Whopper so many times? What do they think that this is going to make me want to eat a Whopper? What do you mean, have it my way? I have no control over this, Burger King. What do you mean I rule? Burger King, do you think I give a shit about what you think about me? Do you think I care about your opinion? I'm not thrilled by advertisements. I've had streaming since I was a kid, and so I've actually lived a good chunk of my life just kind of free from ads. At one point, that presented a unique divergence in the history of media where it seems like, you know, our generation might get free of these constant reminders of the hellscape in which we live. But that dream is kind of dead now. As more and more services race towards profitability, ad-supported plans will become dominant, and ad-free plans are going to get so expensive that you will probably not be able to afford them anymore. There's just simply too much money to be left on the table with advertising. Just today, before I sat down to record this actually, I saw a headline that Amazon Prime has just announced that their current plans will all start to include ads, and that you're going to need to pay an extra $2.99 a month to go back to the ad-free service that you just had. As I covered in my content addiction video, more eyeballs is more money, and they already have your eyeballs, so why wouldn't they try and make some more money? And aside from joking about the annoyance of ads, we should note that they do literally make content worse, as you are no longer the primary customer. advertisers are. Netflix, for example, finally started releasing their streaming data this year, not because of viewer pressure, but because they need to prove to advertisers that they are a good place to sell a product. And as they explained in their October 2022 press call announcing the ad-supported plan, their goal is to increase membership with a cheap plan to then increase ad revenue across the board. They also seek to satisfy advertisers by opting for formulaic, engagement-driven content at a high volume, rather than smaller pieces of risky, interesting, artistic media. This shift leads to standardizations like the Netflix look, where all Netflix shows kind of look the same due to stringent technical requirements. Most shows on Netflix are shot with one of 2 cameras and in a very limited number of formats because Netflix forces creators to do so. Ads directly incentivize this copy-pasted content mill behavior, and it makes the average show worse, even though these platforms are capable of truly creating something much better when they try. So here we stand in 2023 with streaming, it seems, slowly reverting to cable. Prices are going up, control is going down, and ads are on the rise. Not to mention the things that I couldn't get to in this section, like if Disney owns everything, isn't it all just going to come in like a massive bundle that will look just like a cable plan and cost probably a bajillion dollars? I don't know, just throwing it out there. Looking at this, we may start to ask ourselves, how did we ever have a golden age of streaming when it's so clear now that it was unprofitable and unsustainable for all of these companies? How did we ever have that cheap $10 a month payment for total access over an ad-free catalog of content? To answer that question, we're going to have to do the history part of the video, where we go back in time and look at how this whole mess got started.
I remember like very vividly, there was a time in like maybe 2015 that you were like we were maybe in your house and you were like, they're going to do this and then everyone will make one and then you buy it all in a bundle.
I believe Hulu had like just come out whenever, because it was obviously Netflix first.
In 2009, Hulu produced this ad campaign that is aged really poorly. In this ad spot, we see Alec Baldwin play a devious alien overlord who deploys Hulu across the world because, as they joked, the deal they were offering was so good, it could only be the result of an evil plot to take over the world. It's aged poorly for 2 main reasons. One being that Hulu kind of sucks and they haven't really taken over much of anything, and the other being that there was a plan going on in the background to take over the world through media. A savvy, calculated effort to extract all the value that they could and run away with the profits. And sitting at the forefront was Netflix. Netflix is enough of a household name that you've probably heard the history once or twice at this point. They started out as a DVD rental service, mailing little red envelopes to houses, which allowed them to corner the market in at-home entertainment before they made the pivot to streaming, where they revolutionized content for the next generation by delivering video on demand over the internet. This version of events, however, misses a lot. I'm going to suggest in this section of the video that if we want to understand why we no longer bask in the golden age of streaming, then we need to stop conceptualizing Netflix as a neutral party or distributor of content, and instead understand them as an antagonistic force to the existing media market with a long-term plan. After all, they're not a media company, they're a tech company, right? To tell you this story, I'm going to be adding some context and analysis to the events that are laid out best in the history section of Netflix's Wikipedia page. Credit to the editors. This is Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings. In the 90s, they were working together at a company called Pure Software, which Hastings had founded to create debugging tools for software engineers. In 1996, they were acquired for $750 million, which was the largest acquisition in the history of Silicon Valley at the time, and provided Hastings the seed money for Netflix. Citing inspiration from a $40 late fee at Blockbuster, the pair decided to get into the new DVD rental business. Now, streaming didn't exist yet, so we'll get to that a little later, but this DVD rental era saw the birth of 2 themes that we're going to need to pay attention to if we want to understand what's happening today. First, we should note the tech of it all. These were 2 savvy tech entrepreneurs who had done the Silicon Valley 2-step 1 or 2 times before.
Autopilot
and they were
engaged.
taking a bet on a new technology, becoming early adopters of DVDs, which were only about a year old at this time, to see if they could attempt to
Warping to
corner a stake
Stargate.
in the infant
Warp
market.
drive
Second, the DVD
active.
rental days launched a conflict between Netflix and traditional media, as Netflix made an entire business model on cutting into the DVD sales of large media companies. Physical sales were a much bigger piece of the pie in these days than they are now. peaking at $16 billion in 2005, which, for reference, was almost twice the domestic box office that year. Cutting into those sales actually mattered, and established an antagonism that would carry on for years to come. Later down the line, we would see deals attempting to remedy this, like a 28-day rental delay, described here in a Warner Bros. Press release as a win-win by future Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos. It created an agreement that Netflix wouldn't rent DVDs out for the first 28 days after their release, which allowed Warner Bros. To profit off DVD sales and Netflix to maintain favorable relationships. But that specific deal didn't come until 2010, and was a little bit more of a consolation prize to the film industry than anything else. Though Netflix had been cutting into the physical media market since 1999, DVD sales plummeted between 2007 and 2008,
Autopilot
falling
jumping.
26% in 1 year alone, constituting a $4 billion loss. How did that possibly happen, you ask? Well, this video is about streaming, so yeah, it was streaming, at least in part. Starting in 2007, Netflix offered a streaming video plan, which started modestly with a limited catalog, but soon began to expand. However, Netflix continued their previous themes of investing in new tech and cutting into the media market. In 2008, they smartly extended their streaming plan to all DVD renting subscribers, which quickly led to them cornering all of streaming. When media companies began to notice the demand for streaming from consumers, they were lining up to cut deals with Netflix. In 2010, this led to billion-dollar agreements to put some of the biggest movies ever on
Approaching Stargate.
And what kicked this trend into a frenzy was the moment when media began to see the power that internet could have for distributing their content. Breaking Bad was the first cable show to receive the so-called Netflix boost, or Netflix effect. Binge-watching fans supercharged the show's popularity, quintupling viewership from 2 million to 10 million in just one season, changing the way we conceive of how media becomes popular overnight. All of a sudden, this complex, intense drama was being followed closely by millions of households across America as they sat down to binge season after season after season in anticipation of the oncoming finale. It's not a stretch to say that this is one of the most important moments in recent media history. Breaking Bad is iconic, and Netflix helped to make it as big as it is. That's almost undeniable. After this, every piece of media wanted to be on Netflix, wanted to be the next binge-worthy viral success. This was
The
Netflix
Office as
reaching
well.
the zenith of their power, and this was also the golden age of streaming. From roughly 2012 to 2016, Netflix was a one-stop shop for consumers who wanted to have a single monthly plan to access the most content possible. Fueled by a new understanding of what the internet could do for media, Netflix became the only game in town. And for the
Approaching
viewer,
Stargate.
it was a pretty good deal, but good days can't last. This is the point in the story where things start to get a little weird. Up to this point, I've been saying that we needed to follow two through lines, right? That Netflix was a tech company and that they were cutting into the revenue of media companies. But what happens when that tech company kind of becomes a media company? And when all
Autopilot
the media
jumping.
companies that it was cutting into try to become tech companies as well. Our boundaries start to blur and our analysis starts to get more difficult as Netflix raced to become like media companies and media companies raced to become
Walking to
like
Stargate.
Netflix. Over the last
Drive
decade,
active.
Netflix pivoted into originals like Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, Stranger Things, all of the big names. They've dropped some really great shows, honestly, including some of my favorite pieces of television.
Oh,
ever created.
BoJack.
And I don't like to think of them this way, but they've kind of become the media companies that they once stole pie from. Recently, they've joined the MPAA and AMPTP. They get Oscar nominations. I mean, hell, between 2018 and 2023, Netflix went from 8% original content to 55% original content. Led by Ted
Approaching
Sarandos,
Stargate.
modern Netflix has become a media company. At the same time, driven by jealousy over Netflix's success, every media company sat down and had the same idea. What if we hired some software engineers and threw money at the problem until we were Netflix too, but with our own content? In the last decade, everyone has made a streaming service. There's Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, CNN Plus, Max, Discovery Plus, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Stars, which is also called Lionsgate Plus, Quibi, Tubi, Vudo, Pluto, and Fubo. And now,
Autopilot
a
jumping.
tech company causing trouble for media companies ends with that
They
tech
all sound like
company
YouTube.
becoming a media company, and all of the media companies becoming tech companies as well. I'm so tired. So what do I make of all of this? Our current media moment is one
Walking
of
to
constant
Stargate.
chaos and flux, and
Warp
that is
drive
all thanks to
active.
streaming. Streaming has changed everything. As of this year, streaming accounts for 38% of all television viewing, more than any other distribution method. It's the most popular way to watch content on your television, which, as I've discussed on this channel before, still accounts for over half of all leisure time in the United States. Netflix set out to take over the world of media, to capture revenue until they were the only game in town, and they did it. And for a few years, between roughly 2012 and 2016, this meant that they were the biggest and best in town, and that was actually briefly good for consumers.
Approaching
I hope you can
Stargate.
see now, though, how this golden age of streaming and the conditions that surrounded it were fundamentally unsustainable. I'd argue that Ted Sarandis' idea to pursue original content was really savvy from a business perspective, if only because it demonstrates that he understood the game that they were playing. He understood that they weren't going to be able to keep the cash cow of streaming all to themselves, and that when other companies caught in on the game, they were going to need their own content if they wanted to stick around. So they made a plan to become a media company in their
Autopilot
own right
jumping.
before they got bullied out of the space by someone like Disney taking all of their content. This is why when I try to understand Netflix, I think about it kind of like the final season of Succession. It's tech meeting media, a battle of the giants, old and new.
Warping to
And
Stargate.
understanding it through this lens
Warp
of
drive
two
active.
Silicon Valley bros breaking into an existing industry, I start to hear some whispers in the distance of how we might try and respond to this problem as it develops. After all, stuff like this has happened before, right?
I'm an actor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a writer.
Mhm.
It's no secret to anyone that it takes a shitload of people to make a movie or to make a TV show.
Yeah.
That's why the credits go on for forever. There was a structure to make sure that that money was distributed fairly to the people who were making them that money. When new technology comes out, any new technology, the first thing people are going to do with it is find a way to...
Approaching Stargate.
Nice, 40 grand.
Yeah.
using it.
I needed it.
And that's what we were seeing with streaming.
I'm here in New York, where it is, approximately speaking, really fucking cold. So I'm going to be reading this next section off of my phone. I hope that you'll forgive me for that. I live in New York, and not to be really annoying, but New York is very cool. Part of the reason why it's cool is that it's so large and populous. New York is really big, like really, really big, and this size
Autopilot
allows us to model
jumping.
policy like a small or even medium-sized or large state. And this year there were two interesting policies that the city rolled out about how to regulate tech within city limits that I want to tell you about. First was the effective
Warping to
Airbnb ban.
Stargate.
In September,
drive
local law
active.
18 made it so that short-term rentals in the city can only be done by registered hosts who live in the place that they're renting and are there during the term of the rental, while also limiting the number of short-term rental guests to just 2. You might say, wait, doesn't this effectively ban Airbnb in New York City? And to that I'd say, like, yeah, it does. And I think that that's good. Let's talk about why. 30% of Airbnb listings are owned by mega hosts, which are often management companies that have large real estate holdings that they use for short-term rentals. I like this law, Local Law 18, because it
Approaching
de-incentivizes these large
Stargate.
firms from snapping up whole buildings to turn them into Airbnbs. If you need to live in the units and be there during the rentals, then you can't be a management company. You need to be a living human being who owns a home. This helps New
Oh, I
Yorkers by
gotta go
limiting what
back.
Forbes calls
Damn
the
it.
Airbnb effect. You see, since short-term rentals are so much more profitable than long-term rentals, like a standard lease on an apartment, savvy real estate investment would dictate that you should turn your 10-unit building into 10 short-term rentals rather than 10 long-term ones.
Autopilot
The problem
jumping.
is, though, that this reduces the number of available units for people who actually live in New York because they're all Airbnbs. This slowly drives up prices and pushes locals further away from the part of the city where they might work. For more on this Airbnb
Warping
effect,
to
Adam
Stargate.
Something has a really
Warp
excellent video
drive
discussing this same
active.
thing in Prague. The point you need to know for this video, though, is that New York used policy and regulation in order to tip the scales of the real estate market in favor of local renters and away from investors, management groups, and tech companies, and I think that that's really good. There's also been a second, quieter example of this same thing in the city that didn't make quite the national splash that the Airbnb ban did. In November, New York Attorney General Letitia James announced a 9-figure settlement with Uber and Lyft, declaring that their gig work model was not actually a
9
cool way
figures?
for drivers to earn some extra money, but rather a way for Uber to avoid paying its
Approaching
drivers a minimum
Stargate.
wage and to circumvent
Yep.
key labor regulations like sick leave and payment into unemployment insurance. This was another example of the tech industry using smoke and mirrors to avoid existing regulations and protections in the industry they were operating in. By introducing a new model of work wrapped up in a shiny app, Uber tried to say their drivers were not
that's
the
a
same
tent?
as the drivers of days gone by.
No.
No longer was the person driving you from the
Autopilot
airport
jumping.
an employee of the company, rather they were a contractor, obviously no longer entitled to a minimum wage. For more on this gig economy example, I can point you to this very good video by Tom Nicholas on the subject. But for this video, I bring up this example for the
Warping to
exact same
station.
reason I bring up Airbnb.
Warp drive active.
Regulation was used to remedy the way that the tech industry had dodged around existing agreements with an eye towards protecting workers and communities. Policy progressed to meet technology. More on this later. Now, how do we get this back to streaming? Well, the broader trend here is discussed best by Jonathan Taplin, author of Move Fast and Break Things, a 2017 book discussing how tech wriggles out of existing regulations in every sector it sets up in. In the Airbnb example, there already existed real estate and hospitality industries that had certain agreements on zoning, price, and more with their local communities. Airbnb came in and allowed
Approaching
those with enough
station.
money to get around those restrictions under the guise of being a new thing. Short-term rentals enabled by peer-to-peer sharing. In the Uber example, there already existed delivery and driving services in major metropolitan areas, and Uber got around existing laws and agreements by saying they were a new thing, a ride-sharing service powered by gig work. Taplin shares tons of other examples
Docking
like
request
this. For example,
accepted.
discussing in this 2018 talk at the John Adams Institute how digital media hurt musicians. After the collapse of
Autopilot
vinyl and CD
disabled.
royalties in response to
Waypoint
music streaming
reached.
services, musicians like Levon Helm, seen here with Bob Dylan in the band, ended up dying in relative poverty, despite receiving millions of streams on YouTube, Spotify, and Napster. These new platforms shrank the total consumer spend on recorded music by 71% between 1998 and 2014, and they kept what little revenue remained for themselves. And listen, I know that there are problems with the music industry. Copyright and royalties and licensing are all imperfect systems. But over several decades, collective agreements ensured that labor was compensated. I'm not comfortable saying that it's a good thing that Spotify disrupted that model, even if it increased consumer access and lowered prices. And I'm even more uncomfortable that every tech company depends on doing this exact type of disruption, including Netflix. Proper compensation for work on streaming shows was a key issue, for example, in the WGA strike this year. Residual pay models negotiated in the 2007 strike didn't anticipate streaming, and so they left writers on streaming shows earning a tiny piece of what they would make on cable television. This is also true for actors. Remember how I talked about Breaking Bad on Netflix being one of perhaps the most important moments in recent media history? Well, Netflix has never paid Aaron Paul for his work on that show because they don't have to. Technological progress is good. Don't get me
Netflix
wrong,
does not
but
pay
when it
Aaron
redistributes
Paul.
wealth in ways that have lasting impacts on workers and communities,
Wow.
we need to address it. New York is attempting to
Oh,
solve
I
these
had to go
problems with
back because I had to
regulation,
drop
and
stuff,
I think
damn
that's
it.
good. So if we want to fix streaming, we just need to regulate it, right? How hard could that be?
At the end of the day, movies and TV and stuff on these streaming services, it's art, and people made it for people so as to say something about being people. That's a wonderful, beautiful thing, and people should have access to that. If we all agree that it's good and it contributes to society, then the people who produced it should live in comfort and security, right?
Let's talk big idea and potential solutions now. The bigger picture here is that streaming, like all new tech, allows large media corporations to dance around regulation. By classifying themselves as something different from cable, they're able to get around decades of regulatory history, even when the information comes into your house over the exact same cable. This means that companies are going to prefer streaming as a way to deliver content because of the regulatory advantage. That, to me, is a problem that needs to be solved, but you might be a little more suspicious of that. You might say, well, what regulations are they really getting around? How big of an advantage could it be to be classified as streaming rather than cable? The short answer is that they stand to gain a lot. To get to the long answer and understand everything that they do gain, we're going to need to get into the historic relationship between cable operators and the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission. This video is going to end with a regulatory history section, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. There will be a timeline, and there's no quiz, and I promise it's really interesting. Our story starts with the invention of cable in the 1940s, when people started running antennas to catch broadcast signals and then distribute them with cables to their local communities. In 1965, the FCC first regulated the distribution of cable using powers that it claimed it had under the Communications Act of 1934. And
and the Supreme Court agreed they had those powers in 1968. So we start off with two basic facts. Cable operators exist, and the FCC can regulate them. From this point on, the entire history is essentially a power struggle between these two groups, as we try to figure out who can regulate what and how much. In 1976, the FCC expanded regulations, requiring cable operators to carry signals for public access programming. But by 1979, cable operators had struck back in a case called FCC v. Midwest Video Corp, where courts determined that requiring they carry public access was actually outside the FCC's jurisdiction. Eventually, Congress got around to passing the Cable Communications Policy Act in 1984, which was the first legislation passed on cable. It helped make cable popular in American households, but most of that growth and increasing popularity was only possible because the regulations in the Cable Act were too weak to protect consumers and local governments. Cable expanded because there was money to be made. There were lacking price restrictions, even in monopoly markets, which led cable prices to outpace inflation by 3 times in the 1980s. And though the Cable Act had originally solidified protections for public access channels, those were ruled unconstitutional in 1985. So by the early 90s, the FCC really needed a win, as did consumers. And they would get that through the Cable Television Consumer Protection and Competition Act of 1992. This brought back price regulations and firmly established that operators and broadcasters had to carry public access programming. In 1996, there were further developments through the Telecommunications Act, which changed who could become a cable operator, which eventually led to concentration in AOL, Time Warner, and Viacom. However, this act also established the Universal Service Fund, which operators pay into to support broadband and telecommunication infrastructure. I don't need you to remember all of the details that I just went through. What I do need you to remember, though, is that those 40 years of regulatory history that I just went to do not apply to streaming. Streaming outlets don't need to pay into the Universal Service Fund, meaning they don't contribute to the infrastructure that makes their very revenue possible. They also aren't required to carry public access programming, meaning that local media is slowly dying. And to top it all off, streaming is being used as a justification to weaken pricing regulations across the board. At the same time, antitrust has been severely weakened in film and television. All of this means that for media companies, streaming is a pretty sweet deal. And whoever comes out on top of all of these streaming platforms that we see right now is going to have a fucking field day, people. Remember earlier when I was talking about how these media companies were becoming tech companies and tech companies were becoming media companies? As far as all of these people see it, who cares? Start streaming. We're free from the FCC. No regulations. Cards on the table. I think that this is really bad. We've already talked about how it hurts the people who are creating media, as well as the people who are consuming media, and now we also have to contend with the fact that because of what is essentially a loophole, we are going to lose local media, as well as billions of dollars for public infrastructure, and we'll still be forced to watch— oh my god, no! You might be asking now, though, is anyone going to do anything about this? This is Jessica Rosenworth, the current chair of the FCC. In her time there, she has generally supported equitable broadband access. This means things like being pro-net neutrality and pro-increasing broadband access for education. I like those stances. So I was a little surprised to hear how hands-off she's been when it comes to regulating streaming. She's gone so far as to publicly say that she doesn't think the FCC has the power to regulate streaming, citing that she doesn't think the Cable Acts of 1984 or 1992 empower them to do that. If you're anything like me, you're probably a little shocked to hear that, because, like, you know, Jessica, you're the chair of the FCC. If you don't have that power, who does? But there is a bigger picture here. The interplay of federal agencies, Congress, and the Supreme Court is a little fraught in 2023. For the last 40 years, federal agencies have enjoyed a privilege known as Chevron deference. The basic idea is that when Congress empowers a federal agency, like the FCC or the EPA, to do something, the Supreme Court will defer to the agency's interpretation of the law. This means that when Congress passes the Clean Air Act, the EPA interprets and implements it. When Congress passes the Cable Act, the FCC interprets and implements it. There are some flaws with this system, but I think it is preferable, in my view, to the current stated alternative. It's generally more efficient than asking Congress to enumerate every last tiny power it wants to grant a federal agency, and it also generally means that decisions are made by experts in a given field who have been empowered by people that I participate in electing. And the alternative is Clarence Thomas. Chevron deference has been significantly weakened by the current U.S. Supreme Court through a line of reasoning known as the Major Questions Doctrine. Essentially, if it's even a little unclear if a federal agency has the power to do exactly what it's doing, the Supreme Court has given itself the power to answer that question when it is of significant political or social importance. What this ends up meaning is that 9 unelected lifetime appointees have given themselves the power to disregard expert opinion, kind of just on vibes. This video isn't about the Supreme Court, so I'm not going to get too in the weeds here. The important thing to know, though, is that Jessica Rosenworcel knows that the Supreme Court wouldn't be on her side if she tried to use the Cable Act to regulate streaming. This is why she's called on Congress to pass legislation explicitly empowering the FCC to do so. I think the only way that we're going to get out of this is with that piece of legislation. When cable got too expensive in the 80s, the Cable Act of 1992 regulated prices. When streaming gets expensive now, we should have the Streaming Act to do the same thing. We need something that regulates price, that protects public access, ensures that these companies pay their fair share into the public infrastructure that makes their revenue possible, that prevents concentration, and dozens of other things that I am unable to think of on my own. Without a piece of legislation like this, monopolization will continue, prices will rise, consumers will have a worse deal, and workers will not get paid as much as they could. I don't see a way around it. If I'm being honest, though, there's something a little bit bigger than a single piece of legislation going on. The Streaming Act would be great, but it doesn't capture the saddest part of this all to me, which is that I grew up believing that streaming was just the next step in our societal advancement. We developed a way to get more content to more people more conveniently and for less money. So, of course, that would be shared with the people because that's what society is for. Progress. But thinking this way is what has allowed this same harm to happen again and again and again. When asked about why Netflix made the pivot from just distribution to creating their own content, Reed Hastings says in interview after interview after interview that they are simply emulating what cable operators did in the 80s and 90s. Create a new technology to get around regulation, make a ton of money, and then use that money to make your own content.
The
so
asteroid
you can stay in
is
the game.
depleted.
This has all happened before, and it will happen again. Rest assured that even if we regulate streaming, even if we regulate it really well, there will come a day when something new comes around. Picture 15 years from now, someone like me trying to explain to you why your brain media tube is repeating all the sins and inefficiencies of streaming. If that thought makes you uncomfortable, it might be because you understand that there is a deeper problem in the way that we relate to our technology. I hope we pass a streaming act, but I hope more that our social development is finally able to outpace our technological progress. I hope that we find intuitive and just ways to prevent the harms caused by new technologies, even as progress continues. We can't just keep scrambling to recover each time something new comes around, barely able to tell if everyone is okay. Streaming is becoming like cable, but given the circumstances, I hope you can see how this was almost inevitable. The lesson then can't just be to learn that there is a single problem we must solve. The lesson is that this will happen again, unless we learn to do better than we do today. I hope you liked this video, because this is the end of it, so it would be weird if you got here without liking it the whole time, but, you know, I don't want to judge. I hope that you'll subscribe and give the video a like, and maybe come around next time when I put out another new video.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Hi everyone. Today, I want to tell you all about the conservative
Why conservatives want their own economy.
directory Public Square. I'll be
Thank you for the
examining them
X cuts
among
from
the
stream
backdrop of
dummy.
recent
I'd like to sub to your
conservative
channel.
businesses and boycotts, looking at their ideas, products, and people in order to answer a very simple question. Do I want my coffee beans to be 15% pro-life? This video is broken into 4 sections, which I invite you to consume at your leisure. Public Square was founded in 2021 by this guy, Michael Seifert. He's a graduate of Liberty University, the evangelical school founded by the late pastor Jerry Falwell, who you may recognize from his vast network of anti-abortion activism. After graduating, Seifert worked at J.H. Ranch, a high-adventure Christian guest ranch, otherwise known as a father-daughter ropes course. Then he went to Pacifica Enterprises Management Group, who operate a $1.2 billion real estate portfolio. And as of this summer, Seifert is a CEO on the New York Stock Exchange. Here he is at the IPO for Public Square with Donald Trump Jr., a notable investor. Board members include former United States Senator from Georgia, Kelly Loeffler, and this guy, Omid Malik, a hedge fund exec who runs 1789 Capital, Barbahar Partners, and formerly Columbia Acquisition Group. Columbia recently completed a business combination with Public Square, which is what helped it get to the New York Stock Exchange. Public Square is part of the growing movement of conservatives calling to separate from the economy and create their own parallel one. This is among the backdrop of both Target and Bud Light facing relatively effective conservative boycotts this summer, which saw Bud Light losing its market lead to Modelo, and both businesses reporting a loss compared to the same quarter year over year, even 6 months later. Moves like this have garnered energy and attention among conservative media to uphold conservative alternatives. That is, products made by companies with conservative owners or declared values. Public Square aims to expand on this idea of the parallel conservative freedom economy, as they've been calling it, by offering a central digital marketplace that will bring conservative businesses and consumers together. Or, in a particularly mask-off way that this parallel economy has described itself, stop giving your money to woke corporations who hate you and give it to me instead. Public Square is growing fast, boasting over 1 million users, 55,000 businesses, and most recently a 7-figure ad deal with Tucker Carlson. They claim to offer an alternative to so-called woke businesses like Amazon, so that conservatives have a value-aligned place to shop.
Amazon.
In order to achieve this, they ask businesses that they
Jeff
work with to
Bezos is
adhere to a
woke, is
certain
he?
set of values, which include supporting truth and freedom, protecting the family unit, celebrating the sanctity of life, supporting small businesses, and believing in the greatness of our nation and the non-negotiability of our Constitution. Or, as they summarize it, pro-life, pro-family, pro-freedom. As of the time of this video, Public Square still has a bit of a ways to go before it becomes the anti-woke Amazon that commentators are touted it as. Sitting at a $353 million valuation, it is just 0.026% the size of Amazon, whose size I believe it will likely never rival. More on that later. Moving on, I want to talk to you all about the elephant in the room, being the businesses themselves and the products that they sell. Many previous anti-woke alternatives have shared one common problem, being that whether you like their politics or not, they're grifts.
I don't know why I got a
whether
lion, but
beers,
okay.
razors, or supplements, are of a higher price when compared to their counterparts time and time again. There's loads of journalism covering how figures like Alex Jones have made a killing off of this. Take, for example, products from self-described God King and Daily Wire CEO Jeremy Boring, which include pronoun chocolates that come in at $25 standard price for 4 1.5-ounce bars, an amount of chocolate I could get for a fifth of the price from Tony's. Or take Conservative Dad's ultra-right 100% woke-free beer, which came in at $35 for a
beer.
six-pack at the peak of the Bud Light
$35.
which, in my opinion, can only be read as a blatant cash grab. This problem persists in the age of Public Square. It's all too easy on this website to find a $16 stick of deodorant or a $260 blanket, both of which have cheaper alternatives everywhere from trusted consumer brands. For some of the businesses on the platform, it appears that this markup originates from the fact that they're small businesses. They're boutique vendors who are selling a specific niche product, often at a tiny scale. In this way, the platform is a little bit more like Etsy than Amazon. Personally, I don't derive pleasure from mocking businesses for not being able to compete with a monopolistic powerhouse like Amazon. So I want to be very clear that that is not the thing that I am harping on here. What I do want to harp on are the businesses that, in my opinion, are engaging in bad faith practices that exploit their consumers in order to get more money out of them than they otherwise deserve. One such business includes North Arrow, whose website homepage reads, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." Jeremiah 1:5. God knows his children before they are conceived. Life does not begin with a heartbeat, it begins at conception. Buy now. What you may not glean from this language and imagery is what exactly you're buying, which in the case of North Arrow is coffee, at $19 to $22 per bag. 15% of purchases are donated to pro-life organizations, the list of which you can see on the website. Even after accounting for that free tax write-off you're handing them, though, it's still pretty steep for a bag of coffee. I pay $12 per bag for the beans I use, and that's in a relatively high cost of living area. If you're a conservative who's made it this far into the video, hi. On the off chance that you're waiting for me to say something particularly disagreeable so that you can write off my entire opinion on the subject, let me cut the shit. I will make it no secret that I disagree with these people. I am about as pro-choice as they come, but that is not the problem that I have with their businesses. I don't just want to go, haha, they think life begins at conception, let's all make fun of them and call it a day. My disagreement with their politics is, for now, a separate question. The issue I'm exploring in this video is the way that they capitalize on that political anger in order to turn a profit. I call this concept anger as a commodity. a process by which a business identifies a particular set of political angers and then uses them to target, animate, and ultimately sell to a group of consumers. If you know a better name of this from an existing body of literature, please link me to it in the comments. I suspect deeply that I am not the first person to come up with this concept. The big problem with this to me is that in this model, these businesses don't need to improve on their product or innovate in order to beat their competitors. Rather, they simply have to convince you that buying their tiny chocolates is a virtuous act that will destroy the people you hate. This, in my opinion, exploits the political anger of their customers in order to make money. I discussed this previously in a video on PragerU's Unwoke Inc., which I'll borrow from now in order to ask an important question. Are you really owning the libs when you buy from one rich dude instead of like these, enable these businesses to corner a loyal customer base by convincing them that where they buy their coffee beans is not a personal or consumer decision, but rather a meaningful political one. If you're not buying from us, you're buying from them, and that's bad. This is the essence of Public Square. Its very existence depends on commodifying political anger. You shouldn't buy from Verizon. You should buy from Patriot Mobile, even though it's more expensive. Don't worry about that, though. They love Jesus. Verizon doesn't love Jesus. You shouldn't buy from Kellogg's because they pose a threat to our values. Tony the Tiger is going to destroy the nuclear family. Buy from Gorilla Grains instead. You shouldn't buy from Axe. You should buy from Hatchet Jacks. Why? They love Jesus. Public Square has a whole blog page explicitly dedicated to this ditch this, buy this dynamic, which tells me that their goal is rapid consumer and business capture in order to make money. Stop giving your money to woke corporations that hate you and give it to me instead. At this point, I'll reveal to you all that when I first conceptualized this video, this was about all I had intended to do. I think that it's really weird to expect to see
I like this side of him, but I didn't like his other stuff that much.
Expression. So I was going to come on here, find some Jesus-loving, super expensive products, tell you about all of them, and call it a day. But somewhere around the 7th or 8th jump scare cameo from a massive figure in conservative politics, I began to realize that maybe I had some different questions on my hands. Like, wait, should I be taking this seriously? Are we actually going to have parallel political economies? Do the investors really believe in this? Earlier, I mentioned some investors and board members, Donald Trump Jr., Omid Malik, and Kelly Loeffler. I believe that their involvement is significant when considering Public Square's intentions because, in my opinion, they all have some kind of iffy records when it comes for looking out to the little guy, especially when profit is involved. I'll start with Omid Malik, probably the least well-known of the three. Malik is a hedge fund executive who currently runs 1789 Capital and Farbahar Partners. He's been a big proponent of anti-woke financial practices in the last 5 years, particularly rallying against environmental, social, and governance, or ESG funds. This work began after he was fired from Bank of America amid allegations of sexual misconduct. I'll note here for due diligence that I am aware Malik later settled with Bank of America for an 8-figure sum, after claiming the misconduct allegations were leaked in retaliation for him whistleblowing on an improperly licensed supervisor. Some have suggested this is evidence he never committed any wrongdoing. However, given several reported complaints against him, I personally think the evidence points to a more nuanced situation, with B of A committing a financial crime and then attempting to silence Malik using legitimate allegations. Prior to all of that, he began his career in finance working at MF Global as a senior vice president and deputy to John Corzine, which, when the business collapsed under their watch, was the 8th largest business failure in American history, of which Malik said it was good experience. Next is Kelly Loeffler, the former senator from Georgia, who you may remember from a contentious runoff election with now Senator Raphael Warnock back in 2021. In 2020, Loeffler was subject to an insider trading investigation when, after attending a private Senate briefing on the oncoming COVID-19 pandemic, her stock trades included convenience sales in retail stock, along with purchases in stock for video conferencing and medical supply companies. A later investigation by the Senate Ethics Committee concluded without citing her for wrongdoing after carefully evaluating her trades, which Loeffler held up as an exoneration. However, it's worth noting that the Senate Ethics Committee is famously slow-moving, lacks transparency, and is very hesitant to accuse its members of financial wrongdoing, on full display right now in the case of Bob Menendez. It's entirely possible to me that they only found nothing in this otherwise very suspicious case because she was being investigated by her incredibly wealthy peers in the Senate, who are also insider trading. Last is Donald Trump Jr., son of former United States President Donald Trump. Trump. The family business seems to always be in headlines next to the word fraud, ranging from a settlement for students of Trump University to his ongoing civil trial in New York, where he's been accused of inflating the value of his collective assets. Personally, when I look at the track record among these three, it doesn't really instill confidence in the company. The common thread that I see among them is that they are all really good at turning a profit and seem to not really care who they have to harm to get there. Even if I were a conservative, I wouldn't assume that these people have my best interests at heart. I think it's really telling to me that they were all attracted to Public Square as a business venture. I think that they see profit to be made, and I wouldn't assume that the consumers are their top interest. Stop giving your money to rogue corporations who hate you and give it to me instead. I'm now going to try and draw some conclusions from all of this, and to do that, I'm going to need to tell you all about a divergence in my thought that appeared here. Up to this point, I presented what I'll call the "what I think is going on here" take. I suspect that Public Square is not in it for the long haul. Even when I take the question seriously, I don't think that they're going to be an anti-woke Amazon, because I don't think that that's their goal. Amazon is the product of brutal efficiency. Work your people hard, get products out fast, drop your price to squash competitors, monopolize, crush unions, profit. Public Square, in order to actually compete with them or any other such large retailer, would need to be just as efficient if they want to be as appealing as Amazon is to the average apathetic consumer who looks at the price tag. A simple truth that I think all of these investors are aware of is that the vast majority of the public is not politically animated enough to the point that you can get them to spend more money on pro-life coffee. Though the population that is that dogmatic has certainly become more visible in recent years, there's still a very small percentage of the population. The average person is honestly just trying to get the cheaper thing for their dollar. Creating a true competitor to Amazon would be incredibly difficult and expensive, and I don't see any of these investors allowing for the genuinely risky expenditures that would be required to get there, especially when there is so much money to be made by cornering a group of consumers, riling them up via a sympathetic media apparatus, and then taking all of their money.
The
In simple
asteroid
terms,
is
I don't
depleted.
think that their plan for a parallel economy should be taken in good faith. I think the grift will continue. But what about a second possibility? This is what I'll call hell. Imagine, if you will, a world in which the proposed parallel economy comes to be. A world where Public Square takes their consumers' interests to heart, brings down prices, and engages with the market in good faith. Say 10 years from now, there is a genuine question that needs to be answered. Do I want to buy from Amazon, who costs more, or Public Square, who costs less? I find this question interesting for two reasons. The first reason is that it requires people on the left, like myself, to engage in unironic empathy with the consumers that these conservative alternatives choose to target. These people are real, to put it simply, and they are so animated by their beliefs that they are willing to pay more money to uphold them. I honestly can't say that when the chips are down, I would feel the same. The second reason that I think that this question is interesting is because it really clearly exposes the false equivalence present in all of this talk about the parallel economy. In a hypothetical future where my choices are between Public Square and Amazon, it's a lose-lose situation for anyone who is actually on the left. I'd be forced to choose between a labor union crushing monopoly and the forced birth movement. I want neither of those things. There are very few companies under our current organization of society that actually uphold anything I believe in. We live and die by profit, and it's a real unicorn of a company that can compete on that market while also genuinely upholding a social cause. For example, I'm quite fond of Tony's, who try to make slave-free chocolate and educate people about exploitation in the chocolate industry. But even they aren't perfect. One of the simplest facts of our world's
Anti-slavery
economic
chocolate brand
configuration is
Tony's.
that pretty much no business can be an effective avatar of our values. And doesn't that suck? If you finish this video and
Yes.
somehow think that I'm on Amazon's side in all of this,
This was exquisite. This was great vid. I'm gonna say great vid. He uses his brain, and I like that. Let's see what else he has to say. Content addiction is not
I have an
your
important
fault.
question for you. Do you hate silence? Do you have something playing all day so you don't have to sit alone with your thoughts?
Yes.
It's become really natural for me to throw on a podcast while I play.
Yep.
I have an important question for you. Do you hate silence? Do you have
Yes.
something playing all day so you don't have to
Yes.
sit alone with your thoughts?
Absolutely.
It's become really natural for me to throw on a podcast while I play video games or watch a video while I cook or eat, or to have Netflix going while I'm doing work. And about a year ago, I realized that I didn't even like most of the stuff that I was listening to, but that the alternative, silence, sitting alone with my thoughts, was entirely unacceptable. So I listened to a bunch of other people talk about this, and I learned about neurons and reward centers and dopamine response and how to alpha sigma grind set my mind, but none of it really gelled with me. And I realized that I didn't like what these people were saying because there was a critical component missing. Our dominant narrative on content addiction is that it's a key piece in a loneliness and mental health crisis among our youth, but I don't think that tells the whole story, and that's what this video is about. Instead of sharing a life hack or some psychological advice that I'm not qualified to give you, I want to convince you that content addiction is a societal problem, not an individual one, that can be understood as the natural output of our current media economy, and perhaps even addressed if we learn to contextualize it in the history of media, technology, and advertising. Content isn't all that new, and neither is being addicted to it. And I'm going to tell you why that fact matters. A lot. This video is broken into 4 parts. First, we'll discuss the origins of content, which are perhaps a little older than you might think. Then, we'll discuss how in 2023, we live in a bit of a content dystopia that we're struggling to find a way out of. After that, we'll try and connect some dots by discussing the most important thing that all content shares. And finally, I'll try and offer some solutions based on what we've learned. Please, enjoy the video at your leisure. When was the first piece of content created? Not media, not art, but content. Was it the first YouTube video? Was it the first post added to a social media website ever? Personally, I don't think it's any of those things. I think we've had content for a lot longer than we think, starting in about 1833. Let me tell you why I think that. In March of 2021, Academy Award-winning director Martin Scorsese published an essay titled Il Maestro, narrativizing his discontent with the state of modern cinema. In it, he deliberately separated content from art, noting that content is a business term for all moving images. A movie, a cat video, a Super Bowl commercial, a superhero sequel, a series episode. He also notes that content is offered up by algorithms, which, by definition, are based off calculations that treat the viewer as a consumer and nothing else. Now, I'm not some film boy who wants to uphold Scorsese's idealized version of some golden cinema that we've since desecrated, but I think that his point here is useful. Content is not art. It is commercialized media made for a profit. Art is meant to evoke emotion and insight, to explore the medium that it's produced in, and to pose questions about the nature of our very existence. Content, even the most well-produced content, is designed to hold your attention for as long as possible and create a space where advertisers can sell you things. Art has existed for thousands of years, a natural form of human expression appearing across peoples and cultures. Content has existed really only as long as there have been advertisers trying to get your attention. I'm not some purist who believes that art good, content bad, or something like that, but I do think that the distinction is important because it changes the way that we create and distribute any individual piece of media. When it comes to content, it better be exciting. It better be engaging. It better keep people's attention because advertisers will pay you more money the longer that you can keep people watching. As I'll say throughout this video, more eyeballs, more money. Exploration of the human condition be damned. For all these reasons, the word content immediately calls to mind TikTok and YouTube Shorts feeds, creators stitching together edit after edit in order to keep you engaged for as long as possible, epitomized by figures like Mr. Beast. Jimmy shamelessly and correctly informs young creators that if they want to succeed on the platform, then they need to learn to think like YouTube. Keep people engaged for longer, and the algorithm will learn to love you. Think like an advertiser, not like an artist. The last decade has seen more and more people using the term content to refer to what they're watching. But I'd argue that content itself has been around for a lot longer than you'd guess from listening to Martin or Jimmy. If the defining feature of content is that it's created to generate ad revenue, then we don't need to limit ourselves to social media to find the first piece of content. We don't even need to limit ourselves to digital life. Consider, instead of social media ad revenue or the cheapening of the cinema, something like the penny papers. You may have heard the term used before to describe a newspaper from the turn of the 19th century that would have been sold for a penny. The penny papers weren't cheap just because they were old, though. The term penny papers was used at the time to describe their relative cheapness when compared to competitors. Other newspapers at the time were going for about 6 cents and depended on subscription-based funding or funding from political parties. But the game changed in 1833 when Benjamin Day's The Sun began to popularize the advertiser By running advertisements and taking in ad revenue, they were able to drastically drop the price of the Sun, which in turn allowed them to increase the size of their readership, which in turn allowed them to attract more advertisers. The cycle continues infinitely from there. This is the very same business model described today by figures like Ben Shapiro, who has called it an arrow pointing from money to a Facebook ad, back to his website, back to more money. It's the social media content business model. Spend money, get attention, sell ads, get money, repeat. The penny papers did this same thing, just without the internet. And this business model isn't the only similarity between the penny papers and the content of today. Sources like this one, presented to the American Journalism Historians Association, note how the penny papers employed saucy writing and a manageable size to get more readers, which is them basically saying that they used clickbaity, sensational headlines and made it an easy read so that they could get a bigger audience. From the very beginning, as soon as advertisers and media got together, they've had an eye toward engineering the most attention possible, because they know that it is going to make them the most money. The profit of these media institutions has depended, from the outset, on optimizing for attention. And today, some of us have noticed that that constant optimization has consequences. The term content addiction usually runs parallel to words like smartphone or social media, and is almost always used to undermine an image of Gen Z. Young people, often children and teenagers, rotting their minds out on TikTok or destroying their self-esteem on Instagram. It's a ghastly image of a dystopian future, a dopamine-addled generation anxiously waiting for the next notification. Is someone going to do something about it? In October of 2023, a large group of state attorneys general in the United States of America filed a lawsuit against the technology company Meta, owner of Facebook and Instagram, alleging that they had knowingly made their products unsafe and addictive, and that they had lied about their impacts on youth mental health. This isn't the first time that social media sites have faced legal scrutiny, as I'm sure many of you are aware. But I believe that this Meta lawsuit in particular is worth consideration. Social media sites have been accused of negligent and harmful practices for almost as long as they've been around. The adverse psychological impacts on children in particular first entered the zeitgeist in 2006, following the death of 13-year-old Megan Meyer, when it became apparent that cyberbullying on the platform MySpace had played a considerable role in her eventual suicide. Ever since, there's been a dark cloud hanging over Silicon Valley. Why doesn't Zuck care about the children? To be really clear, deaths like Megan's are tragic because social media is bad for us. We've known that for a very long time, and we have pretty decent evidence to prove it. Social media use has long been correlated with negative health outcomes like loneliness, depression, anxiety, reduced sleep quality, and so many more. And a reduction in social media use tends to correlate with positive outcomes across all of these symptoms, suggesting not just correlation, but causation. But previous attempts to protect children and other social media users have run into a notable obstacle. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, which states that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. In other words, Google, Meta, YouTube, or any other site that takes in user-generated content cannot be held liable for the content that users post. Section 230 has gained something of a reputation online in the last couple of decades, among discussions of free speech and corporate responsibility in particular. The immunity that it offers is divisive, as some claim that it allows companies like Meta to shirk responsibility for things like hate speech and terrorist organization on their platforms. On the other hand, many people believe, perhaps rightly, that something like Section 230 is a requirement for functional free speech online. Websites like Facebook receive so much user-generated content every day that forcing them to parse all of it at the threat of legal action would almost certainly force them to shut down. There are tons of cases that revolve around Section 230 that have wound up dead in the water, as time and time again, they focus on the harmful content on these platforms. So when the state AGs sat down to craft their most recent suit, they did their best to keep Section 230 out of the question entirely. This suit is not about content. It's about design choices of the platforms themselves, as well as how they were marketed. By ignoring content altogether, they can win the case without having to challenge Section 230 at all, by saying, these ways that you designed your platform broke the law. If you want to read more about the specific design choices that are discussed in the suit, I've linked it below. The important thing to know for now is that the suit is looking for relief for violations of consumer protection laws, which means that if the attorneys general win their case, they would force Meta to change the design of their platform. This includes ceasing the collection and use of personal data from minors without verifiable parental consent, ceasing untrue and misleading claims about the safety of their products, or limiting features that they know increase unsafe addictiveness, such as infinite scroll, haptic feedback, algorithmic recommendation, and public display of engagement metrics, among others. The suit even directly alleges that Meta has engaged in a more eyeballs, more money style of predatory content, saying that these unsafe, addictive features were built to engage users in order to increase ad revenue. So if you're anything like me, you might see this as a welcome development. It's always been a losing battle to go after the content, especially when we all know that the real dangerous thing about these platforms is the way that they're designed to keep you hooked and to ruin your brain. But if you're anything like me, you might also think that this suit doesn't quite go far enough. It targets addictive design choices, yes, but it fails to tackle a much deeper question. What encouraged Meta to make these addictive design choices in the first place? And how do we stop it from happening again? So far, we've established two things. One, that content was born when media realized it could get in bed with advertising and make a killing. And two, that today we've arrived at some kind of logical conclusion of that scenario, where we live in this weird dystopia where massive corporations are sucking children's souls out through their eyeballs. I want to try now to figure out, how did we get between those 2 points? Based on my viewer demographics, you're probably watching this video on a smartphone. Maybe you're watching it in bed, maybe you're not, but that's how I watch a lot of YouTube videos. Smartphones are great. They're little magical boxes that give me fun lights to look at, and I like them. And they're also a great illustration of media's second best friend, technology. You see, we didn't just jump straight from the penny papers to TikTok, from the printing press to the iPhone. There were loads of steps in between that slowly allowed media to permeate every second of our waking lives. For example, if you've ever walked outside while listening to your AirPods, that obviously wasn't possible 100 years ago, but there were people who understood that if that technology did exist, it would make them a lot of money. The first radios came about in 1904 with the invention of the vacuum tube. They progressed to the car radio in 1930, which expanded their reach even further. Cheap recording and playback eventually made it so that you didn't need a radio signal and could play a record or tape back in your home or vehicle. And by the 1970s, you could listen on your Walkman anywhere you went. That paved the way for the iPod and eventually the iPhone and AirPods. That evolution is really fast. We went from massive, clunky, low-fidelity devices all the way up to tiny receivers that can give you all human information ever created in just 125 years. And an evolution that quick poses the classic Jurassic Park problem of technology. We were so obsessed with if we could that we didn't stop to think if we should. I subscribe to the belief that creating a new technology is not a value-neutral process. Inventing a hammer is also a declaration that we ought to hit nails, and inventing AirPods is a declaration that consumers should be able to listen to content wherever they go. But when we pause to think who benefits most from developments in media technology, it's rarely a win for individual consumers more than it is for massive corporations. There's a reason that companies like Apple, Sony, and Google are simultaneously distributing content at the same time that they create the technology that you use to listen to it. It's because it's really profitable. Every time they create a new device or software that makes your viewing experience more seamless or enjoyable, they are simultaneously expanding the size of their own content market and making a ton of money. All media operations in history have salivated over your eyeballs in this way, and they love using technology to get to it. One of the most flagrant examples I can think of is CNN, which was literally founded by a billboard salesman when he realized that his advertisements could reach more people if he were broadcasting them on television, and that they could reach even more people than that if the broadcast were running 24/7. It doesn't matter if your viewers develop insomnia or anxiety. What matters is that more eyeballs equals more money, and we can use the airwaves to get more eyeballs. If you ever feel like you can't get away from content and that you're constantly listening to things, it's because this incentive to get your attention has brought content everywhere. We have radios to bring it to our cars, headphones to bring it to our public transit and our walks down the street, TVs to bring it to our couches and living rooms, and phones to bring it everywhere else in between. Thanks to technology, we can watch and listen anywhere at any second of the day. But that also means that the entire world is a market in which massive companies vie for our attention. Content addiction, then, isn't some newfangled curse that came with social media. Media has always had the incentive to addict. They've just gotten better at it. And in case I haven't been clear enough, yes, I am saying that this means that older generations have content addiction too. This is not unique to my generation. The US Bureau of Labor Statistics consistently finds that watching television is the most popular leisure activity in America by a mile, accounting for over a half of all leisure time. We all know a Gen Xer or a boomer who incessantly watches cable news, and am I really supposed to believe that that's any different from doom scrolling on TikTok? When we obsess on social media and ignore other types of content addiction, we lose an ability to see that thing that all media technologies share, which is an obsession with our attention. When I say that the Meta lawsuit doesn't go far enough, then I say that because this battle won't be won by regulating design choices on individual social media platforms. Any regulation we can devise will become obsolete when the next big media technology comes around, because we failed to tackle the underlying incentive structure to get your attention by any means necessary. Regulating individual technologies, then, while useful in the moment, is also a failure to see the bigger picture. Television and radio regulations proved ineffective for the internet, and internet regulations are going to be ineffective when the Neuralink starts playing ads in your dreams.
Okay, so I want to wrap this up. If we want to solve content addiction, then we can't view it as a psychological problem to be solved by individuals, because we know that in our current organization of the world, businesses will continue to bombard them through any channels available in order to get their attention. It doesn't make sense to put out these individual fires then when there's this massive dragon flying overhead. And if we want to solve content addiction, we also can't view it as a regulatory or technological problem, because history shows us that this hunger for ad revenue and consumer attention has existed across all technological platforms for the last 200 years. This dragon is something of a hydra, and as soon as we cut off one head, more will grow back in its place that we aren't prepared for. If we want to really solve content addiction, whatever that means, then we need to view it as a social and political problem. Large companies exist to make as much money as possible, and for media companies, that means selling valuable ads, and as many of them as they can. In order to do that, they need to engage and retain as many viewers as possible, no matter the consequences. Content addiction, then, is not some accidental byproduct of social media. It's not a quirk or a sickness or a defect of the system. It is the most profitable way for media to exist, and it always has been. Our solutions, then, if we really want to solve this problem, should center around the social and political change that would allow us to reduce the power of advertising in media. That's a really tall order. I understand that. That's a project that probably can't even be completed in my lifetime, but I don't think that means we shouldn't try. To start, if you're in the United States, I recommend that you become a sustaining member at your local public media station. For just $5 a month in much of the US, you can get access to PBS Passport while simultaneously supporting your local station. This will get you in on a ton of high-quality entertainment and journalism and information that isn't singularly beholden to advertiser and engagement metrics. I'm not being paid to say that either, but I should tell you that I do work in public media. We're facing a real crisis of youth support right now, and I think that the next decade is genuinely going to be make or break for if your local community will continue to have access to information like that. If you have the money, though, you could genuinely contribute to the continuation and strengthening of what is the largest network of grassroots-funded local information and media on the planet. Similarly, I'd recommend looking into online communities that focus on content and loneliness. People like Healthy Gamer GG and Elliot Sang make great content discussing what this stuff does to our minds and what solutions might look like. Groups like r/anti-consumption can give you great tips on avoiding advertisement and finding ad-free alternatives. Companies would like you to believe that ad blockers don't really hurt them all that much, but I think they care about them a bit too much for that to be the case. Those are some bigger picture solutions, but you might still be asking yourself, well, what about me? What about my content addiction? What about my incessant need to consume things for fear that the silence will consume me? Like I said earlier, I'm not qualified to give you psychological advice. So if you or someone you know seems to really need help, I suggest that you seek it. People are willing to listen to you, and it's not silly. As far as individual solutions go, I can really only tell you what worked for me.
what reduced my anxiety, let me use my time more efficiently, things like that. If you came to this video looking for some magic pill, a life hack, or a button to press that would make it all go away, I'm sorry, but I really don't think that exists, and I think that looking for it is a waste of
Oh,
your
it does.
time.
It's called
As long as we
heroin.
have this larger
Heroin will do it just
societal
fine.
issue,
You'll be like, ah, yeah. Trust me, and everything will be fine.
you, me,
I'm kidding.
and everybody that we know are going
Orgasms will do it. Orgasms, heroin, a really, really long-awaited victory. You know, there's, you know.
Content addiction, no matter what we try. Personally, I've tried uninstalling Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. I deleted them all in 2020, and that was great, but I still get online through YouTube and Reddit and things like that. I also enjoy some more classic wellness practices like journaling, an exercise routine, and meditation, but they only do so much. I've also tried setting aside time every day that is a no content zone. For me, this usually means I go on a walk once a day without my headphones and just kind of let my brain decompress. That's been really nice. I also switched to audio-only content before bed so that the blue light didn't fry my eyes out and destroy my sleep. All of these things have helped, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't sometimes feel really weird in silence still. I really love media, TV and movies and video essays and everything in between, and it's really hard to see all of it depend on these toxic and abusive platforms. If we want to engage with this stuff that we enjoy so much, we have to make ourselves susceptible in some way to content addiction, and that's really scary to me, personally and politically. I think then the biggest thing that I can offer here is a change in mindset. If you find yourself addicted to content, you aren't broken or weak or lazy or alone. It's not your fault. There is a massive global infrastructure that needs you to be addicted to this stuff. I encourage you to forgive yourself and forgive others and build community, and don't try and fix it all in one day, because you won't. More eyeballs is more money, but that also means that taking back your eyeballs is a strangely meaningful act that you can do right now, and you should feel empowered when you do it. In a world where your attention is a very valuable product, enjoying silence is revolutionary, and I hope you'll try it out. Did you like that video? It seems like you did, because
good.
this is the end of it, and you made it here. So why don't you consider subscribing and making it to the end?
Why don't you consider sounding like everybody else on the internet? Oh, come on, the transphobia sub. Come on, man. Trad wives against feminism. What is that? Touch starvation. Okay. No, we'll just go back to YouTube now. This was good, but you're a little too perky. Here,
Do
this
you
is-
see this great looking game, all shiny? See how it's promising things you've all wanted? Be it the MMO of your dreams, or the zombie survival game of your dreams, or whatever it might be. Well, it's all fake, as evidenced by two very high profile cases. The first being the day before, and the most recent one being the Quinfall. And both of these cases show a very frightening
Liars.
pattern that's developing in video games.
Yep.
And it's something that worries me.
that there might be really they're just out to rob us now, and that there's only a few good titles left, and that this game like New World, for instance, that she thought might be not so good, It's actually the only good thing that's come out in the last like 5 years, which is so bad. It's like, what happened to MMOs? What happened? What happened? Lodestone brick.
And I think it should worry you, because they take advantage of many of gaming's greatest advances and twist them, using them in the worst way possible, while combining social psychology to manipulate consumers and game the system. I'm not going to do a deep dive on these two cases, because there's plenty of people that have done so already. And just in case you haven't seen any of them, you have links in the description to those videos. I'm here to talk about the dangers of this new way of scamming, and to explain how exactly it works and what these scams are banking on in order to work. There are massive consequences to this, and I think these cases are the warning signs of a brand new era of games, the age of fake games. And there is a lot to talk about, and a lot that we need to prepare for.
Stop
by the
ripping
way,
us off,
I'm
assholes.
Muggsy, and I make videos on things I care about. And this is a really big topic with a lot to cover, but it's very important to everything gaming, so that means I care a lot about it. And there is a precedent for this sort of thing. There's always been a precedent for these things. We've gone through many different ages of people trying to make money off of video games, while using as little resources as possible, often crossing into the area of scams. We had bootleg games as far back as the NES, but when digital distribution came into its own, we were inundated with shovelware targeting uninformed users and your average clueless parent. After access to those platforms became easier, we entered the age of the asset flip, selling themselves on either curiosity or for easy trophies or achievement points, or baiting with ridiculous sale prices. The Steam store still today suffers from getting so many new games every day that finding the gems among what is now
Oh
the
my
standard
god.
low quality.
Okay, just this year there was 14,000 games released on Steam. We couldn't possibly be playing them that many. I just don't think. Do we really need all that? I don't know.
Affairs gets more and more difficult.
Play about 200
And
games a
because of
year.
this
You guys
system,
release
scammers
14,000.
have now had to
something.
reinvent themselves if they want to be successful. You could say NFT games were also a scam, but those really didn't target the same people that this new breed does. And I think these new ones are so much more dangerous. And so I've decided to call this new breed cover games, because that's all they are, just a cover for an empty book. An empty shell trying to convince you to pay up front. And the psychology behind how they work is perverse to the point where it's almost impressive. And the worst part is, it's easier to do than you might think. So let's break it all down. Firstly, we already know that scammers are gonna scam. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. There will always be people looking for ways to make money off of things, be it classic email scammers, AI grifters, or asset flippers. So, to track how these games operate and how they come to be, I think the easiest way is to start there and then begin to ask questions. Once stores are absolutely flooded with low-quality games looking to make a quick buck, while I'm sure for many the return is still profitable to keep making them, the promise of making any actual money lowers dramatically.
Oh my
So
camera
what do they
screwed
need
up.
to do?
Oops.
Well, they need to stand out.
I'll
They
fix
need
it.
to become a
Sorry.
game worth looking at, worth being interested in, and worth asking questions about. And that sounds like a great idea on paper, but all of those things require a careful effort in each of those areas to actually work. But not so much effort that it won't be worth the return. And this balance between effort and return has to keep paying off. So the things you need to show keep getting grander and grander in scale to really make a dent. And the first part is making a game worth looking at. And this is where the magic happens. The democratization of game development tools has been a boon to the indie game scene and aspiring developers. You can download a multitude of different engines to work with right now, from Unity to Godot, and of course, the very shiny, very impressive Unreal Engine 5. And you might think, well, but you still need to build a game. Access to an engine doesn't give you a game. And that is partially true. You don't really need much more knowledge than what it takes to make the asset flips we already see. And that's because assets go beyond simple enemies or textures. They can be entire systems, from character movement to combat to having characters shoot, loot, or throw spells. The same can be said for environments, from locations to functioning interactable buildings and weather effects. All you need is the basic knowledge to implement them and the wallet to purchase them. And you might rightly say, that's just an asset flip. So what separates these cover games from asset flips? And the answer is everything else. While asset flips are content with putting together something resembling a game and then putting it up on a store and seeing who bites out of curiosity or because it says it's 90% off or something, these new games are attempting to market themselves to mainstream audiences, to really have a big spotlight on them and to convince people that they are big projects that you should believe in and invest in. And they also avoid a lot of the pitfalls of other alternative game scams like things that you see on Kickstarter, because they're not asking you for any money up front. Instead, they're creating a game, convincing you that it's real, convincing you that it's great, and then putting it up for pre-order. So they're avoiding all of the typical warning signs that something might be a scam, trying to look as much like a real game, and then taking people's money. And you might think, but there's other ways to spot them, we've already learned, but the day before shows that a lot of people ended up buying it, and this does indeed work. And if it worked for
Not
them,
me.
people are going to try it at smaller scale.
I listened to Kira. Kira was like, don't truck with this madness, it's complete bullshit. I was like, okay, and he was like, really, don't buy a day before, I'll put my reputation on it. And I was like, okay, and I listened to him and I didn't buy it and I'm happy. You know, I have good warning on that one, you know. Where am I? What? Ugh. I think that's everything. Yeah, I think I'm done now, huh? Yeah, I think so. Pure solvent, 1,231 of it. 2 copper. I have 1,000 dill. Oh, I didn't go to the kitchen. Oops. Nice carbonara. Yeah, look at all that. 276 garlic, 1,000 dill, and 184 honey. It's gonna make a lot of seasoning blend. Oh yeah. Nice. Yeah, are we out now? No, we're not out now, but we can keep going for a while though. That was good. Get some nice seasoning blend. Ooh, sausage, cinnamon, and game meat. Cheese and sausage and stuff, cinnamon and red meat.
sequels in other niche genres, but they'll follow the same game plan. Throwing assets into a blender doesn't make a good game, and as per usual, I have to make it clear. Store-bought assets don't make a game bad. It's not about the assets themselves, it's about how you use them. If they're implemented well to fit into a game or used with some sort of vision, they can be a tool in aiding development. However, buying a ton of assets for almost everything is a very bad sign, and the nail in the coffin is when the actual gameplay systems are also as basic as they come. And yes, I mean literally, as in how they come when you buy them. The first real difference is how these games understand the power of a pretty image. The assets can be bought, and the game itself can be terrible or non-existent. But if you can make those things and make them look all shiny and 4K, understand what your audience will naturally stop to look at, well then you'd be on the right track. Clever use of camera angles, lighting, and other effects can make anything look compelling, especially if you don't need to actually represent a real product. There's plenty of cost-efficient ways to make your trailers, screenshots, and attempts at viral campaigns on social media look professional. From decent voice acting and voiceovers, anything that looks graphically AAA, even if it's all canned or baked in or bought, and even to hiring influencers to react or promote it. Anything necessary to get in front of people's eyes. If enough people see it and have something to say, eventually other influencers will organically react to it, and the train just keeps on rolling. Congratulations, you made a household name out of a game that doesn't exist. The extremes of this are games like The Day Before, who had their trailer featured on IGN, and it got a lot of attention. And before you roll your eyes at me talking about IGN, remember that this is one of the biggest mainstream outlets that are in gaming. It's not just about if it makes waves in our tiny corner of the internet. It's the fact that for many average consumers, seeing something on the IGN channel or on their website legitimizes it. It makes it all look very real and very professional. And the reason it got as many views as it did is because it looks really good. But that's not the only thing you need to do. If you're going to have real eyes on your game, you need to sell people that a real game exists. And so far, these people aren't taking lessons in the school of making games. They're taking them in the Killzone 2 school of making bullshot trailers. And so the next step is to take lessons in the Peter Molyneux and Todd Howard school of making empty promises. If it worked for them, why wouldn't it work for me, right? So you have to promise. Promise and promise. Fabricate a game worth being interested in. Doesn't matter if it's real or not. Just like I'm promising you right now that if you hit the like button on this video, you'll have good luck for the next 5 years. Now, that isn't true at all, but you will help the video reach more people, and you'll have my thanks for it. But as for examples, well, The Day Before, a survival open world zombie MMO. The best parts of The Division, The Last of Us, and Rust combined with a true AAA open world in a huge MMO. Who wouldn't want that? It's a great idea, and if you told me that on paper,
just thinking about it.
I'd be excited. And if you then showed me the trailer and the artwork, all of which shamelessly rips off and evokes all of those great games with a budget that seems unreal, I'd be excited. And if I saw the trailer and then heard about the game, I'd still be excited. And this is where it gets insidious. Because the worst you can say about the game is that it sounds too good to be true. If a game looks bad, we forget about it. But if a game looks too good to be true, well, now we're talking. People start to wishlist it, bookmark it, talk about it, speculate, say if it's real or not, and finally, they'll start to investigate. But you're paying attention. You give it word of mouth. Because the worst that can happen is that it's not that good. The internet keeps turning and turning, and now we're talking about SEO and Google results. And meanwhile, they're taking advantage of it to keep getting the product in front of more and more people. You keep thinking that the worst that can happen is that it's not good. Maybe it's not as great as it sounded, but still a good game. Maybe at least it's interesting, or there's a good fun story around it. But you wouldn't just dismiss it and throw it out, and that's precisely why it works. A lot of people, some even desperately, want the project to be real, and so it grows. It feeds on people's hope, whether it's their wait-and-see approaches or the wars between naysayers and believers, but in the end, it grows. Or what about the Quinfall? It's the largest MMO world ever! That's the bold claim off the start that accompanies their trailers, already deconstructed to show how pretty much everything in them are store-bought assets, and even some recent news mentioning that some of the assets used were delisted in 2015, conflicting with their alleged initial development start of 2021, and other elements seem stolen since they're assets that aren't for sale but are present in other games, like the case of its UI and Black Desert Online. But if you didn't know any better, the game looks fine, promising even. It has bold claims, it has building and housing, it has raids and dungeons and towns. And of course, we all know that MMO players are starved for games, including myself, so we gotta hold on to what we can, right? So, you think that it's all there. You listen to the promises and they have your interest. And that's when they execute the final step. If the audience has questions, they have answers. Who are the developers? Where is the money coming from? What is their previous experience? But the real issue is that once we reach this stage, the scammers have already won. They have answers with complex structures for companies and fake addresses. They'll talk about remote work and satellite offices. The developers behind Quinfall have real experience in making a much smaller scale MMO in record time, but to find that out, you'd have to go digging. And what you find are answers that, for as much as they can be suspicious, also serve to give people hope. And the final result is that the game is available for money. Fake games for real money. Pre-order now, get early access and exclusive skins. They perfectly imitate everything else the market does. All the other games are offering you early access and exclusive skins, so this must be a real game, right? Hurry up and get that early access so you can be the first to find out if it's real or not. And enough people will bite that it's all worth it for them. And that's why it's truly a new scam for a new era. The era of rampant algorithms and misinformation where people believe what they want to as long as you show them what they want to see. The era of react content and viral clips. And I don't think those things are inherently bad. That would be very hypocritical of me considering that I comment on a lot of stuff. Quite the contrary, actually. Being completely honest, the majority of content covering the day before and covering the Quinfall now are people very directly warning others in titles, thumbnails, and beginnings of videos that these games look like scams, that you should be cautious. But at the same time, when you consider that the day before got to be the most wishlisted game on Steam, how much it sold on release, what we see is that it doesn't matter because that exposure is still beneficial to them in the end. It's not quite the Streisand effect, but somewhere around there, and they benefit from it in the end. And while the day before resulted in the historical first time ever that Steam has refunded everybody who purchased the game, as these tactics evolve, as they keep worming their way into the system and taking advantage of it, other projects won't have that happen to them. And that situation with the day before can even be seen as a double-edged blade. It also makes people feel safer in wanting to try out any other game that might be similar. We think, well, I can still get a refund, or they'll refund everyone if it's fake. But the truth is that the tactic works, so scammers just have to tweak the execution a bit. They can hide those initial 2 hours for the refund window behind tutorials, or a garbage pacing at the start, or server queues that can very well be fake. Even if people do refund it, as long as the game isn't such a mess that Valve has to step in, these people know for sure that enough consumers will simply never refund it for it all to be worth it. And anything else that may happen, they'll keep adapting to stick close to that line of effort in exchange for return on their elaborate scams.
The
And the
asteroid
worst
is
part
depleted.
about all of it is that I still can't in good conscience tell you outright the Quinfall is a scam or it's a fake game because maybe it comes out and it's simply very basic or bad, but not an outright scam. But they got all the free press in the world for a game that we can list out the entire budget through the assets that it's using. And because it's working, more and more people are going to try their hand at it. It's not like the playbook is completely new. Mobile games have been doing this style of marketing for years. We're just expanding it to a grander scale and selling it to a different audience. And there are possible complications, there are difficulties, but they'll work around them and find ways to not make it matter. Things like how these games have been announced a year or two in advance to their releases. Well, they'll find some excuse or fabricate evidence to make things look more legitimate, and they'll keep going on their merry way. So, what is the end result of all of this? What are we left with? And how do we fight it? Well, for starters, established developers and publishers matter more today than ever. This is very unfortunate for indie devs who already have it hard with the amount of games and getting discovered. But the truth is that if a reputable publisher is backing a game, you can at least believe what the game is claiming. At least for now. The second is that you shouldn't believe anything you see. This has always been the case, but now more than ever. If something looks too good to be true, it's okay to hope that it's real, but never ever believe it. And if you value your money, don't pre-order, don't wishlist, don't do anything, because you're going to feed them attention. If the game is real, trust me, you'll find out when it releases, because people wouldn't shut up about it. But don't waste time and energy beyond morbid curiosity on projects that look too good to be true. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a fake game, and you can care when they prove the opposite. When people you trust actually play it, or a reputable publisher picks it up, then we can start with the wishlisting train. But things like wishlists are very valuable. The conversation on content and if it should be made or not is debatable. I think that warning consumers is good, but it does lead to more press. And since we can't stop it, at least stopping pre-orders and wishlists is important. These things legitimize these games, especially into people who aren't aware of them or don't spend time on YouTube or X or anywhere else. And they might see a game as one of the top wishlisted games and say, oh, this looks great, I can't wait to play it, and plop down for the pre-order. And the third one is to follow trustworthy sources. Whether that's a website or a publication you trust, an influencer or a streamer you trust, whatever it may be. For as much as in my circle, most of what I saw were people talking about how the day before was a scam, I've also seen plenty of channels with 500, 600,000 subscribers reposting trailers. IGN and GameSpot had big bold claims of official exclusive gameplay from the day before. Don't get fooled. So let's face the truth for a second here. Even if this style of scam keeps growing and gets popular, it's easy to imagine that the damage will be minimal. Sure, we'll be inundated with fake games and fake trailers, and it might even be fun. And you might think nobody is going to fall for this, especially if you're someone that's in the hobby and in the culture. But the truth is that what these games are looking for is to reach a broader audience, a less informed and more gullible and hopeful audience. These scams aren't an impulse purchase for $1 on an online store. They're targeting the widest possible audience in their respective genres. And when they get the attention they're looking for, and the modern algorithmic media machine gets a hold of it, not only will there be victims, not only will the scammers make a profit, but it makes all of games look bad. It scares people away from the medium, or can lead to mainstream media coverage misrepresenting gaming. Not to mention how they promote this horrible culture we're already seeing, where we have to be skeptical of everything all of the time. There's enough terrible practices coming from huge corporations today that I don't want to worry about our stores being flooded with scammers and our feeds being filled with fake trailers. And my hope is that we're all here because we love games, and we love our hobby, and we want the best for it. It doesn't matter if you think that the damage these games cause is not significant, or if you just find them funny. The truth is that we don't know how out of control this thing can get, and these guys are realizing very quickly how to utilize the system to their advantage. So call this stuff out, because we can very well be witnessing the start of a whole new racket. And if this video made you think about the situation in a different way, or you consider what I have to say valuable, please hit the like button so that it reaches more people. Share it with someone if you think they should be aware of what's going on. And of course, I'll always appreciate it if you consider subscribing. Like I said, I make videos on things Bethesda Game Studios is
Thank you,
responsible
Mug Thief, for
some
the
of
excellent
most-
content from your stream. I'd like to sub to your channel. Thank you, Mug Thief, for the excellent content from your stream. I'd like to sub to your channel. This video is called All of Bethesda Game Studios Mistakes.
Popular and fan-favorite games ever made. From Morrowind, Oblivion to Fallout 3 and all 17 re-releases of Skyrim. But having hit the highest of highs, there's a constant conversation about its decline, and how it has hit brand new lows with their latest release, Starfield. But when did their decline truly start? And what decisions ultimately led us here? People have wildly differing opinions on when things went sideways for Todd Howard and his leather jacket. So I have taken it upon myself to cover what I hope is all of the most controversial decisions in the studio's history, from Horse Armor to the Creation Club to live service games, and even telling their customers that they're wrong. Bethesda is responsible for some of my favorite games, and that will never change, no matter how much they do. But I think it's worth going back and finding out where mistakes were made, even in some of my favorites. This is going to be a fairly long ride, so grab a snack, fetch your nearest mug, and join me in a comprehensive timeline of all of Bethesda's mistakes. To start off, it's important to clarify what Bethesda we're talking about. In its lifetime, Bethesda has been split into two different things. From 1986 to 2001, Bethesda Softworks was a video game studio. But in 1999, when ZeniMax was created, the structure within the company changed. Bethesda Softworks became the publishing arm of ZeniMax, and Bethesda Game Studios was born, transitioning all of the development things into that. To keep this focused, we're really going to be talking about the development studio, which did change names throughout time. But we're also going to exclude some of those earlier years where they were making Wayne Gretzky hockey and Terminator games. And that's because most of Bethesda's early life as a studio is similar to a lot of stories of other great studios from back in the day. A small group of highly ambitious and talented developers working on what they could, until they buckled down and chased their big break. For Bethesda, that was the Elder Scrolls Arena. They were even told by other developers that what they wanted to do was impossible. But inspired by their love of pen and paper RPGs and Ultima Underworld, they created
drive
the world
active.
of Tamriel. And I have nothing to really say about these early years. There were a lot of good things happening at Bethesda at this time and not that many mistakes, until we reached Daggerfall. To put things into perspective though, Arena released in March of 1994 and became a cult hit. Daggerfall would release in September of 1996, and it was a massive jump in every possible regard, going from a full-blown and impressive RPG in Arena to a full world with 15,000 towns and over 700,000 NPCs. It changed the progression system from allocating skills that you obtained from experience
Docking
points and
request
levels
accepted.
to rewarding the player for doing actions that fit in with the role they wanted to play, leading to a system that, after some modifications, is what we have all the way today. It also changed into one of the first fully 3D engines, being the X engine. And they did all of this in just 26 months of development time. There are many interviews on the net, but I'll be citing an AMA by Julian Jensen, who was the sole programmer on the game, which he did on the Daggerfall subreddit. In it, he says the deadline was incredibly tight for the project, but it kept ballooning in scope, with many features and ideas being thought of and attempted to be implemented towards the end of development, despite there not being enough time left to even reach the polish needed for release. This led to many people criticizing the large amount of bugs present in the game at launch, as well as it having poor performance and requiring very strong hardware to run, things that would be fixed in revisions of the game later on.
It's important to note that almost nobody involved in this game would be present by the time we reach Bethesda Game Studios proper. To me, this is just proof that Bethesda itself has a soul of its own, or DNA, because it seems that war isn't the only thing that never changes. In 1997, they would release Battlespire, a standalone dungeon crawler which was initially conceived to be an expansion to Daggerfall, and then they would also release Redguard, which is also set in the Elder Scrolls but was a Tomb Raider-inspired action-adventure game. Both games
Oh no!
did pretty
A lost
bad.
soul
Turns
aggro
out that
me.
people had
Son of a
associated the Elder
bitch.
Scrolls with sprawling
Kill me so
open-world
quick.
RPGs, and going from
Thumb
arena
dog,
to
and the
Daggerfall,
bomb toss,
their
the
audience
thumb dog
wanted
and
to
the
see a
bomb
similar
toss kill
evolution
me.
for their next
Absolutely.
project, instead
Oh, well.
of a claustrophobic dungeon crawl or a Tomb Raider ripoff. And with two huge failures on the wall, they doubled down to make Morrowind the best they could. Now, this doesn't really reflect on the quality of those two games. I actually think Redguard is pretty fun, but they didn't do what their customers wanted, so we have to put both of these up on the failure wall. So after 4 years of development, Bethesda provided what people wanted. They jumped engines again, moving to the now legendary Gamebryo engine by Numerical Design Limited, and Morrowind was another huge jump. Thanks to a direct 3D engine capable of lighting, 32-bit textures, proper skeletal animations, and more, Bethesda made a really important decision. The game world would be populated by handcrafted elements like they had done for Redguard, instead of random algorithmic methods they employed for the enormous scale of Daggerfall. And I'm sorry to break narration again so quickly, but isn't it insane how full circle we've come? I mean, this gets even better later, but when I drafted this video, I thought it might not be worth doing, but in research, I just came up with all of this stuff that feels kind of prophetic. Anyways, Morrowind released in 2002, and it could easily be considered one of the most influential RPGs, if not games, of all time, and it was a true leap in everything that we'd seen until then. And I know this video is about the mistakes of Bethesda, but it's important to contextualize the great heights that they reached. While Arena and Daggerfall were innovative for their time and respectable in their own right, Morrowind just hit different, both then and now. It's a marvel in design for the time, from the open world to the freedom it presents the player, the skill progression system, and even the way the main quest is arranged, which, while requiring players to complete a number of steps before going to the end of the game, it allows the completion of most of the objectives in whatever order the player wants, applying the same mentality to all of the sub-quests required to complete the quests that you need to do for the big steps. It's really cool. It fleshed out the world of Tamriel, and thanks to all that freedom in building and developing your character, for many people, it was very close to the Dungeons & Dragons games that they had always wished for.
Yeah.
After the failure of those two spin-offs, Bethesda really planned on being one step ahead this time, not only returning to the format expected of them, but also closing the gap technologically to be once again the leaders in tech of the industry. And the push for switching to a newer engine and pursuing more ambitious technologies to offer players the best there was done by none other than Todd Howard. Morrowind famously started off as a bigger project, but it was scaled down due to it being overly ambitious, and they decided to dial down on a more focused vision, with talks of multiplayer, for example, being completely discarded, a clear indication of how committed they were. Almost the entire first year of development was dedicated to the Elder Scrolls construction set, which allowed staff to iterate in small increments, and that's what the around 40 developers that they had on staff at the time used to make the game. Morrowind, despite this renewed focus, would be delayed from its original slated release of late 2001, and it was pushed back slowly into May 1st of 2002. According to Pete Hines, formerly of Bethesda, it was due to balancing and testing. It also released on Xbox, and both on PC and on Microsoft's console, it was very successful and well received by most, but with the usual complaints. Reviewers and consumers alike agreed that the game had some notable bugs and glitches. The game also required top-tier hardware and was considered a resource hog, and it had other issues, as Greg Kasavin from GameSpot, which is one of my favorite reviewers, said, "The very first time you boot up Morrowind, you'll be treated to a memorable, stirring theme filled with soaring strings and booming percussion. You'll proceed to hear it, literally every 5 minutes or so during play. Greg would go on the Supergiant Games, which makes things like Hades. So, good job, Greg. Despite these issues, what the game offered at the time was so new, so freeing, that the consensus was that a game this special needed to be played, and Bethesda was on top of the world. It was a triumph, a trend-setting triumph. It set the tone for RPGs and somewhat marks the shift for CRPGs, which are coming back today with things like Baldur's Gate 3, and the move into the modern single-player RPG. Many would compare Morrowind to an MMO, and RPGs of that time would imitate parts of it, but never do it exactly the same, earning Bethesda a spot in the pantheon of developers, and the Elder Scrolls a spot in the pantheon of video game franchise greats. And so we reach The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. For many, the last great Bethesda game, although I disagree. Oblivion started development shortly after Morrowind and was once again another ambitious jump. The goals were to flesh out the story, NPCs, and acting, leading to many improvements, including the famous Radiant AI system, which was billed as allowing NPCs to lead lives independently of the player, but be affected by events that could simply happen. And of course, the implementation of the Havoc physics engine we all know and love. When it released in 2006, it was praised all over, despite still having some glitches and bugs. But it was such a leap forward that pretty much everyone loved it, and was a resounding success to solidify the position of the dev and the franchise.
Physics in Oblivion?
It's worth
I'm not so
mentioning that
sure
while
about
I'm
that.
skipping over how buggy and glitchy a lot of these games are, they really were very buggy and glitchy, and we will talk a lot about this later. But there's something more notable with Oblivion, and that's how in 2006 we were all exposed to a concept that was still new to most of us, and that is downloadable content, now commonly known in the shortened DLC, and Bethesda chose to innovate in this department as well. Imagine how naive we were at the time that we all thought it was a cool idea. Back then, we were still trapped in either being afraid of putting our credit card info into our 360s or computers, or busy convincing our parents to do it. But from what I can read and what I remember, people thought that a couple bucks for new stuff was amazing. A way to keep adding things to games we loved, especially on console where the idea of mods didn't exist. And for many people that know very little of PC gaming, mods never existed to begin with, I guess. Bethesda would implement its first DLC pack in 2006, and it was the perfectly named Horse Armor. For $2.50 American, you could equip your horse with some sweet armor. It did nothing, but it looked cool and existed. This was criticized, and now it's a piece of gaming history, but Oblivion would feature a lot more DLC. Most of it was better than Horse Armor, including some small quests with rewards and different houses for the player. It'd be followed up with Knights of the Nine, a more involved side quest, and finally the expansion, The Shivering Isles, which also released to major acclaim. Now, while Horse Armor was a miss, and it is now viewed as an omen of things to come, in all fairness, Bethesda would course correct their DLC model into one I personally think was pretty damn good for a minute. But we'll get there in a bit. For now, remember that contrary to the meaningless and expensive Horse Armor, hitting the like button is meaningful and completely free. We now move on to Fallout 3, which has a complicated history. First, the license was acquired after Interplay closed down, which held the IP at the time, and it was purchased by Bethesda. And Bethesda did announce that they were going to work on Fallout 3 all the way back in 2004, which shows us a habit that they have of announcing the existence of games very early on, not that that has any relevance today or anything. Principal work on the game wouldn't start until after Oblivion had shipped and updated, since it's the same team that's responsible for Fallout 3. After that announcement, Todd would say in February 2007 that the game was still a ways away, but hey, it was teased in July of 07 and released in November of 08. Fallout 3 and its sister game New Vegas, which I won't really cover here since that isn't a Bethesda game, are some of my personal favorite games of all time, and it's surprising how quickly they made these. Emil Pagliarulo, who also wrote on Oblivion, would helm the main quest writing in Fallout 3, and he will pop up in a bit, and the internet has plenty words to say about him. Once again, Bethesda's new game would release to universal acclaim, despite controversy surrounding the continuation of the Fallout franchise by people who were not involved in its creation. Those people who created Fallout, by the way, did say that they were interested in continuing the series, but unfortunately for them, Bethesda was the highest bidder. Other people also criticized some of the changes in tone that it had done from the previous entries in the series, and many people claimed that they were changing too much of something so beloved. Other criticisms included its shooting mechanics, since they weren't really like an FPS, it was more of real-time dice rolling, meaning that you could put your cursor on an enemy and you could still miss, but overall, most of the things in the game were highly praised and well-loved, including the world, atmosphere, the VAT system, and many other things. What wasn't loved, though, were the now almost hilarious level of bugs and glitches. Certainly heightened by the growing presence and willingness to share online, the perception seems to be that Fallout 3 contains many more bugs and glitches than the previous games by the studio. Many of them very funny heads spinning or ragdolls glitching or items disappearing, but also many game-breaking and scripting bugs, leading quests unsolvable or leading to soft logs, as well as major stability issues on PS3, leading many people to warn against that version entirely, and all of its frequent, constant crashes, with some unexpected additional consequences sometimes. This is really where the legacy and fame of Bethesda for bugs started, and many a video essay over time would cover it, leading to Joseph Anderson's now iconic Bethesda's bug. I do want to mention, because this is my video, that I don't think the DLC structure for Fallout 3 in New Vegas was bad. Sure, not every expansion, which is how they called them, was great, and they would vary in length and content as well, but as a model to follow where you periodically add larger parts to a game, including expanding on its ending, or things like the Excellent Point Lookout, to me that was all pretty cool. So hey, while there's plenty of controversies, I think it's a nice course correction from Horse Armor. Although it's worth mentioning that all of those expansions came with their own hosts of bugs and glitches, with a common sentiment of the day being that having all of the expansions installed heavily affected the stability of the game as well as overall loading times. And I want to touch on some stuff regarding New Vegas, even though we're not going to cover it in depth. I've seen a lot around the net, but I'm going to be quoting this interview with Josh Sawyer, who was the project lead and designer on New Vegas. Josh was working on the original Fallout 3 at Interplay before everything went down, and he worked on New Vegas along with another Fallout veteran and the writer of Planescape Torment, Chris Avallone. So in the end, a lot of the old guard of Fallout worked on New Vegas, so good for them and good for us. In this interview, Sawyer mentions that they had 18 months to make New Vegas, and that it was only possible thanks to the fantastic tools provided by Bethesda. But as expected, with the time and no prior experience, bugs were just bound to happen. If Bethesda makes buggy games, we can't expect better from a team that doesn't even know the tools. He also mentions how all the DLC in New Vegas was designed to be DLC from the start and planned as standalone adventures, which is just a nice little thing to know. Also, Fallout New Vegas is not overrated. It's still great, at least to me. By the way, since it's worth remembering from time to time, Obsidian, the studio behind New Vegas and many other great games, is now owned by Microsoft, just like Bethesda. So please give them the Fallout franchise. It doesn't matter if you love Fallout 4 or 76 or whatever. At the very least, these guys deserve another shot at the franchise just to see what they do. So please, internet, rally behind this. Give Fallout to Obsidian, please. So yes, I want to stop a second because, like I said before, I'm kind of breezing over how terrible the bugs and glitches were in Fallout 3 and New Vegas and the games before it, but they were very serious. As I said, some of them are smaller things, ranging from funny to annoying, with things like items phasing through the map, but there really were a large number of serious bugs, and I remember so many forums I used to frequent having post after post of people confused, wondering if they did something wrong, if it was all working as intended, or if the game had glitched. And that state of confusion speaks to just how janky and common these things were, and they wouldn't get much better once we reached
Shank.
Dovahkiin. Sorry, I mean Skyrim. Now look, It's really clear at this point what the pattern with Bethesda is, and while we all know it, we don't talk about it enough. And I think it's reached the boiling point with Starfield. But here we go again. As always, Skyrim was praised by the masses and critics. It was another big jump. It debuted the Creation Engine, tools developed in-house by Bethesda, but based on the Gamebryo engine. It was the biggest success in terms of sales and cultural exposure that Bethesda had ever had. People praised losing classes and adding dual wielding, the new streamlined user interface, which was noticeably better for consoles compared to Oblivion, the perk system, the world design, the general production of it, the improvement in writing, which I am legally obligated by the community to add the word debatable improvement in writing, and things like the voice acting.
I used to be an adventurer like you, and I took an arrow in the knee.
There were criticisms, of course, things like how straightforward the main story was, with the story being kind of told at you instead of you really doing much in it, or the AI or combat. But the biggest criticism, once again, was the technical mess that the game was. And just like every other time, and I'm not acting high and mighty here, I'm sure that at the time my opinion was the same, we forgave all of those technical problems for all of the good in the game, for the unique brand of RPG that Bethesda made, which kept evolving in different ways. But these bugs would not only would become worse. There were frequent crashes, slowdown, scripting breaking, physics breaking, just anything you can imagine, and even corrupted saves. Skyrim would get a ton of patches over time, but I think the unofficial patch list speaks for itself, addressing the issues that remain after the official patches and not all of them. It was expected at this point, it was the norm. And by now, The Elder Scrolls was a console game through and through, which I guess helps with optimizing and bugs, but also not really, because despite being the primary platforms considered in design and also in sales, the console still had a ton of problems, and as usual, there were more on PS3. Skyrim didn't just sell like hotcakes, 3.4 million in 2 days, which is crazy to think about today, not to mention in 2011. And it would also be followed by DLC, and that DLC would also receive some criticism, mainly Hearthfire, which added more in-depth player housing, something that people thought should have been included.
Yeah,
from the start,
Skyrim
or
was
at
like
least
the
be
best
free.
single-player
And
launch of
I
my
personally
life.
didn't
I would
like
say.
the DLC
I was
for
so excited
Skyrim
for it,
all
and
that
it did
much
not like
compared
it
to
did
the
not
Fallout ones, but
it did
I
not
might be
it did
biased
not
or insane.
disappoint.
In April 2013, Bethesda announced that they were moving on from Skyrim, which allow me to laugh because now we know how that goes. So we're going to leapfrog a bit here because Skyrim actually keeps going and overlaps everything except Starfield. So we'll come back to it in a bit, but for now, we move on to Fallout 4. And Fallout 4 was a shit
Connecting.
show on a lot of levels. It really symbolizes for
I
a lot
like
of people
Fallout
the
4.
start of the decline for Bethesda,
I think it was alright.
even though the clues were there all along. Fallout 4 would release on November 10th, 2015, and listen, it was a massive commercial success. It was bigger on launch than Skyrim, as Pete Hines would say. But get this, the reviews went down, and so did the responses from the community, and for a lot of reasons. Fallout 4 changed a lot of stuff for the better, sure, for one it actually plays like a shooter, which was welcome, but it was also criticized for being less original, less unique, worse written, and containing a lot of changes people didn't like. And listen, I love playing Fallout 4, especially in theory, and very rarely in practice. It's a fun game, especially after a ton of mods, but there's a lot of problems to quote here. The voiced protagonists. This had a couple of problems. For one, the amount of dialogue options were now limited to a very Mass Effect style wheel, commonly attributed to the need of voicing everything in budgets, but it could also just have been streamlining to appeal to a different demographic. Additionally, the options with the wheel were truncated, so you would read the concept of the response, but what your character would say was often different, with some of the first mods available substituting the wheel for traditional text, saying exactly what you would say. Then there was a new emphasis on building and outposts, and that's a big topic on its own. It's kind of a take it or leave it thing, but it definitely didn't make everybody happy. Overall, there was and still is a big divide in the community, with many claiming that the gameplay and exploration is the best it's been, but the story and RPG elements are the worst they've been. Also, people really didn't like the bugs this time, and it had a lot of bugs, the same as always. But none of this is the biggest blunder. No.
That was weird
So
how the
welcome to
poison wore off
Creation
immediately.
Club. Oh yeah, mods would be coming, but for money. In 2017, alongside the release of Skyrim Special Edition, and I mean look at it, it's so special, Creation Club was implemented in both Fallout 4 and Skyrim Special Edition, and it's an in-game store that sold what many considered mods.
I quickly got a hold of my new clothes after loading up a save and suspiciously put them on. The textures were high quality, the stealth suit kept that cool feature that lets you turn invisible upon crouching, and altogether, they were pretty cool outfits. Then I remembered I just paid $8 for them. Sure, these add-ons were nice, but not $8 nice, unless they come with money. A couple of modders on the Nexus could have easily made this content without Bethesda's funding or assistance that the company claims to be lending to Creation Club creators. As a matter of fact, the gameplay you're looking at right now of the Chinese stealth suit isn't actually the Chinese stealth suit that's being offered on the Creation Club. No, it's one I got for free on the Nexus. This is the one that's being offered on the Creation Club. Do you see a difference here? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I fail to see one that constitutes Bethesda's ridiculous price tag.
In an attempt to remain somewhat objective, I will say that Bethesda says that the content here was made by independent creators, but using funds from Bethesda. However, the content on the store was not very different from those you could find in mods. So yeah, paid for, curated mods. And to be fair, some modders supported this because it allowed them to make money and improved the quality control. but also paid mods. They did bring the system to consoles, but it's important to mention that by doing this, they introduced paid mods. And on top of this, it implemented horrible tactics like having to purchase a digital currency to buy the paid mods. I mean, creations, whatever, who cares? This idea of separate currencies, ever since Microsoft points, has always been a tactic to make you forget how much something really costs, and force you into odd amounts of money to get you re-upping your in-game wallet, and has been criticized forever. And there's something about putting this into a system that you can use to buy paid mods in a single player game that just makes it that little bit extra horrible. But hey, they reworked the system in December of 2023 into just Creations, which features free mods and paid mods, with the option for paid mods only available to those verified creators by Bethesda. So we'll see how this new version works out. I also want to credit Fallout 4 for butchering the term expansion, which was already hurt with things like Hearthfire and Skyrim, not to mention how different it is from what we used to get many years before that. But here, we got things like Automatron, which is just a side quest revolving around the Mechanist, and it was meh and disappointing. But then we got Wasteland Workshop, and this expansion is just building pieces for outposts. It allows you to have cages so you can make creatures fight. And it's like, really? I mean, if you put this as a bonus on top of some other story stuff, that would be cool, but come on, calling this an expansion? And this was followed by Far Harbor, which was actually pretty good. There were 2 more workshops, and one did include quests around it, so hey, they responded, I guess. The final pack was Nuka World, which again, pretty good, but not amazing. It's also worth mentioning that this was the first year Bethesda went into the mobile game market, with the free-to-play Fallout Shelter, which would prove very successful, racking up $5.3 million in sales in its first 2 weeks, and even receiving some Mobile Game of the Year awards. It was heavily criticized for its use of unnecessary microtransactions, as well as lacking depth, so I don't know how it won awards. I'm not a mobile game expert, but I'm sure there were better games back then. And so we start to reach modern Bethesda.
I don't know, maybe
that
I
we
should
know,
try Fallout
love,
Shelter, might
and
be fun.
love to hate. So in 2018, we got Fallout 76, and I want to say something here, not in defense of Bethesda, but in seeking the truth. I have searched all over and found conflicting reports on this. Fallout 76 is quote-unquote co-developed by Bethesda Austin, which used to be Battlecry Studios. I've seen them credited as the ones making multiplayer possible, but also as the main devs due to some quotes from Bethesda saying that Fallout 76 was fully supported by the main studio, so it's not clear how much the main Bethesda team was involved in this. And one day, I'd like to know, just to know. And they're still technically Bethesda Game Studios, this isn't like the Obsidian thing. So this is still a game with their name and should be judged as such. But I want to know, damn it. Anywho's, Fallout 76 was the evolution of Fallout into a live service game, and I don't know where to start, honestly. Probably at the live service game part. Look, there are redeemable aspects to 76, and I do think that when viewed through a particular lens, some of the criticism towards the game doesn't matter. The fact that there were no human NPCs, and the questing was weird, and all of the robots, a lot of stuff like that I think can even make sense in the story if you look back on it, even if the story is bad. But for me, it's more that the design of this game seems to cater to the people that just wanted the core exploration and combat loop of Fallout 4 and didn't care about the classic RPG roots, story, and character aspects of it. It's just a shame that they didn't do that very well either. Somewhere between pretty bad to it can be fun sometimes if you don't think about it. A lot of the hate this game gets is that it's resources that didn't go into a better idea or a better game, or just something that people wanted more.
I love
I've
76,
seen people who
and
love
I think they're
this
wrong.
side of the franchise, and they
I
really
love
enjoy
76.
Fallout
It's
76.
the only thing
So,
it's
that's
the
a
only thing
thing,
that they've done
and
that's
the
good in a
discussion can
while.
exist for another day by people way more invested in this
It's
than I am,
Skyrim.
and more knowledgeable about every detail of this game's existence. For the topic at hand, the launch of Fallout 76 and its business practices were probably the biggest disaster in Bethesda history. As a funny note, it has the shortest time frame from announcement to release of any Bethesda Game Studios game. from 2002 onwards at least, with it announced on May 30th and releasing on November 14th of 2018. And I'm sure that's knowledge that will impress someone at Trivia Night. Fallout 76 launched a flawed, confused game, not catering to many fans and not really catering to the audience it was looking for within the fans. Its systems were messy, its objectives confusing when they weren't outright missing, and its bugs. Oh, its bugs. I'm just going to leave Joseph Anderson's glorious review of the game at launch and his compilation of bugs, which are two of my favorite YouTube videos possibly ever, and they will be linked in the description along with all of the sources that I used for the things in this video. So have fun with that. 76 was so
Joseph
bad.
Anderson
Really,
was such,
imagine mixing the creation engine's
changer.
track record with online servers, and that's just the worst. But it didn't end there, oh no, because Bethesda sold in-game cosmetics in this full-price game. Amazing cosmetics where you could spend $20 on some garbage costume or $15 on some stuff for your house. People quickly pointed out how these prices, which also used a separate in-game currency by the way, were enough to buy a whole ass other Bethesda game. Now, it is true that in 76, the in-game currency, known as atoms, could be gained from playing, but let's be honest, not really to the extent necessary. And the in-game shop quickly turned into offering quality of life improvements, as well as just improvements, like for your weapons and armor. The game also had a ton of hackers and modders, which was to be expected, and sometimes these two were mixed up. Bethesda famously banned a ton of modders, some of which I'm sure deserved to be banned since they were doing things to duplicate items and affecting servers and the economies, but Bethesda banned a lot of the accounts of modders as well, and they sent all of them emails asking them to write an essay on why cheating and using mods was damaging to online video games. Despite the fact that some of these people were innocent. So, hey, Bethesda talking down to their customers? Never, that would never happen. Foreshadowing is a literary device where... So yes, there was also rampant cheating and a big scandal with hackers stealing items from player inventories at a huge scale. In the midst of all of their controversies and terrible decision making, the best way they found to combat the comments around the in-game store and all of it being too expensive was of course to reduce the prices on the items. I'm kidding, they released a subscription service, Fallout First. For just $12.99 American a month, you could host private servers, which, yes, are paywalled, have unlimited crafting storage, fast travel, extra supplies, and 1,650 atoms every month. What a bargain! Normally, 1,650 atoms would cost you $16.50. So if you think about it, it's a bargain. It pays for itself just in the atoms. Plus, all the other conveniences. I can't wait to be the first
I play free
to fall out.
Because there's not much
Speaking
to buy.
of falling out, the canvas bag. Yeah, they advertised that the special edition of the game would have a canvas duffel bag. And instead, people received a shitty piece of nylon. And after complaints, what did Bethesda do? Well, they gave 500 atoms, or the equivalent to $5 of in-game currency, to those affected by this. Great job, Bethesda. There are reports from many different sources, including Kotaku, about excessive crunch during the development, senior staff leaving, and staff being brought on from other studios to just help support the game. And when Wastelanders, the big expansion that brought human NPCs into the game, came out, everybody was happy because it fixed everything, except it didn't, because a couple of strokes of paint and some boring humans couldn't fix all the problems the game had in so many different areas. There is a full video worth of content just summarizing the stories around Fallout 76 and its community. The game has since then continued to receive support, and you can find all sorts of opinions on how successful that was and how good it is today, which is a little over 5 years later. From what I played in 2020 when the game released on Steam with the Wastelanders update, it wasn't good. It also wasn't the worst, because the environments were cool and pretty and the combat was decent when the server didn't choke. But it was not at all what I wanted from a game with Fallout in the title. But again, I can understand that for some people, it is. And we can argue up and down on the design, the marketing, if it was or wasn't targeted at the right fans, and the communication around it for days. But at the end of it all, I'm just going to stick the entirety of Fallout 76 on the mistakes list. But hey, if there's people who love this thing, more power to you, genuinely. In 2020, Bethesda would strike at the mobile market once again with The Elder Scrolls Blades, a linear dungeon-crawling roguelite hybrid with PvP and a town hub with quests and NPCs. Everyone disliked it, featuring terrible reviews, especially when it launched on Switch, where it was panned for being boring, aimless, and a terrible representation of the Elder Scrolls. And so we reach the saga that is Starfield. I have individually covered a lot of this stuff, but it's nice to view it from this perspective all the way after looking at all the previous years of Bethesda. And oh boy, Starfield itself is not nearly the disaster that Fallout 76 was, but a lot of what Bethesda has done during this really makes it almost as bad, if not worse. And before you ask, Redfall is not a Bethesda Game Studios game. It is an Arcane Austin game. Not by Bethesda, and also not by the main Arcane team behind Dishonored. And there's a lot of stuff there, but it's not within the scope of this video. All of that is outside the house that Todd built, and the house that he seems to try and destroy, so... Starfield is Bethesda's first new IP since 2008 with Fallout 3, which was not a new IP, but it was an IP they took over at that time, so depending on how you want to see it, it's their first new IP since Elder Scrolls, also known as EvE. It was billed as Skyrim in space, and it was not. There was plenty of controversy and online fighting around it, especially after Microsoft bought out ZeniMax, making Bethesda Game Studios an Xbox Game Studio. And after the disappointments with Fallout 4, the enormous levels of hype were contrasted by careful analysis of every word that Todd Howard said, which were a lot. There were a lot of words. Ultimately, the game that released, according to many people, including me, is a game that marks a step down in many aspects from previous games by the studio, with worse design, systems, and even losing some of the most important and immersive ones like exploration. It's been criticized by many people for many different reasons. You might have already seen some videos, and if you haven't seen mine, which I still think is a pretty fair critique, it's in the description below. At the end of the day, there was a perfect storm of hype, disappointment, lies, and more. From how traveling seamlessly isn't possible, to fake planet continuity, to claims from modders saying that it's just too boring to mod. There was plenty of discussion and hate for the game before release, like the infamous tweet saying that the game was bad because we had seen the start screen, and you can know everything about a game from the start screen if you're a developer. I think that was a weird time. When it did release, review scores were all over the place, with people arguing over them, and Bethesda spinning positive press while responding to some of the stronger criticisms on things like optimization or the lack of DLSS support, because, and you will never guess what I'm about to say, Starfield launched with a lot of bugs and a technical resource hog. Oh man, Bethesda never changes. Many people and outlets, as well as Bethesda themselves, claimed that this was the least buggy Bethesda release ever.
Bullshit.
Which
Bullshit.
might even be true.
Bullshit.
But also, with how much attention and meme status
it was the
this
worst
issue has
one.
obtained, it's really like saying that this time your shit pie contains 20% free range
I've never had
mud,
a bug like I
but
did
in the
in
middle
Starfield.
of insults and warring back and forth, and SEO chasing from major outlets, there were some real important nuggets. Firstly,
and I wasn't even
reviews.
modding.
After a while, many players that felt disappointed by Starfield began to leave negative reviews on Steam. Many of these, and more importantly, the ones that we care about for this video, are from players with many hours in the game, ranging from 30 hours on the low end to several hundreds on the high end. So it's safe to say they're real fans of Bethesda that just don't recommend the game, and they often leave long, detailed reviews explaining why. And Bethesda thought the best thing to do was to publicly answer these negative reviews with some of the absolute stupidest replies imaginable, claiming essentially that users didn't like the game because they were playing it wrong, including quotes as memorable and hopefully meme-worthy as, "When the astronauts got to the moon and saw it was empty, they weren't bored." This spun into a ton of backlash from users and outlets, as investigations into the curious wording of these replies led people to reverse engineering AI like ChatGPT to discover that there was a very high likelihood the replies were AI generated, or at the least, AI assisted. So not only was Bethesda talking down to loyal fans leaving genuine criticism, but but they couldn't even be bothered to talk down to them themselves and used AI for it instead. You can't make this up. It got even worse when Emil Pagliarulo, mentioned earlier as a writer on Oblivion, story writer on Fallout 3, and design lead on Fallout 4 and Starfield, took to Twitter, sometimes known as X, to cry. Emil would call into question the legitimacy of critics that were criticizing the game in a long 15-tweet rant, saying that people shouldn't speak as they do about why the game is bad because they don't know how games are made. He tried some other manipulative tactics to basically discredit and disregard a lot of the criticism that was being thrown at the game, leading to very angry critics and a lot of criticism of him, which, don't worry, he's had as a writer over the years as well. This narrative was then taken to extremes as different modders claimed different things about the game, which are precisely the people outside of the studio which would know the most about the inner workings of the game. So at least Emil got exactly what he asked for. There you go. The very people that you're accused of relying on to fix your games are now criticizing it. So congratulations, Emil. Your call was answered. Speaking of which, if you would like to support something that, unlike Bethesda, is constantly improving and executing on creative ambitions, consider subscribing to the channel. Unlike Bethesda games, it's completely free and features no additional microtransactions. And of course, it supports the creation of independent criticism, opinion pieces, and long essays and retrospectives, just like this one, directly counteracting the attempts of Bethesda. Also, unlike Bethesda, I actually give a shit. If you're not convinced, there's still some video, so don't worry about it. Continuing with the wars between those defending the game, including its developers, and those baffled at the reaction, a narrative was spun surrounding content creators spearheading a movement to review bomb and badmouth Bethesda, just as Bethesda released player numbers and Steam crowned Starfield as one of the top sellers, leading to even more debate to keep Starfield on the front page. And if there's one thing we can say about Starfield, is that it's good at dominating the news headlines. Starfield has shown something much deeper than what we see at the surface. It's beyond a controversial game on a studio's now long continued descent from the throne, and beyond the disappointment. It's a show of how times have changed and how at least some people have decided to stop putting up with Bethesda's pattern, made easier by their aging technology and lack of innovation, and even their ability to fail at executing on the design decisions that many have come to expect from them. And while studios change, and so do leaders, decision makers, and the majority of the staff, it's poetic to take this trip down memory lane and see how many mistakes are repeated and how many trends have formed over time. What was once a studio focused on being at the forefront of technology is now one hampered by it. Its repeating pattern of excessive ambition that it struggled
Docking
to rein
request
in
accepted.
overtook it conceptually while settling for what they could deliver. One of the first studios to ever enter the arena of further monetization would course correct, only to then be one of the worst perpetrators of the worst practices possible within it. And when their fans called them out on these things and critics started to shy away, they were so accustomed to the easy treatment and constant forgiveness of their failings, where people told them that the issues weren't that important. They were all overlooked for all of the good that people saw in their games, until there was not enough good in them for people to look the other way when faced with those shortcomings. And what did they do when those people spoke up? Well, condescend their customers and attempt to discredit their critics. The Starfield saga to me shows a sin beyond releasing broken games. It shows a studio too proud, too big to fail in their own minds and in their marketing budgets, that their philosophy is not one of recognizing mistakes and showing improvement like they did all the way back when Morrowind. When they decided to reduce the scope of that game and push for better technology. And now, instead, it's a studio that reacts to their failures not with searching for a way to rebuild trust with their customers, but one that blames those customers for not trusting that the game gets better after 60 hours. And this is a sad story. It doesn't make me happy to take a trip down a memory lane that is covered in mistakes. Making this video was entertaining, fun even, but faced with writing a satisfying conclusion to this video, tasked with leaving a bookmark on this ongoing story, I find myself looking down at the keyboard with sadness. Falls from grace are never truly satisfying, no matter how deserved they are. We love redemption stories, we love to root for the underdog, deep rivalries, or complex villains to topple. But Bethesda Game Studios is none of these things. The relationship between us and them is simple. They're supposed to make great games, and we're supposed to play them. When all of that is muddled and tainted with the stains of conflict, greed, and conformity, we end up with stories like these. Not a villain, but a former ally, one many of us had come to love, falling in agonizing slow motion off a building that they decided to jump off of. We never wanted them to do it. We don't enjoy the fall, not really. And like all the worst or best arguments, depending on how you view it, you end up asking yourself, how did we even end up here? And while I hope this video serves both to answer that question and to mark a point in time moving forward, all I ever really wanted was for them to get off their high horse by walking down the goddamn stairs. And hopefully one day, Bethesda will make great games again, but until then, there's a lot of trust that needs to be repaired, and if you make me choose between watching them continue to fall or see them get back up, shake the dust off, and make something great,
Warp drive
I'm always going
active.
to choose the latter. And just as hopefully, I intend to be there and tell you what they did or didn't do, as always. It's easy to see this track record and be skeptical of the Elder Scrolls 6, and I for sure am, and you for sure should be. But I'm hoping that they can turn it around like they've done before, instead of sinking deeper like they've also done before, and make something great in the end. Because as much as failures can be entertaining, I'd rather play a great game and tell you a story of redemption than one of ruin. So hey, I've been Mug Thief, and if you enjoyed this video, I ask that you consider supporting my YouTube channel in all...
This was good.
Docking request accepted.
Fallout 76 is the 9th installment.
Thank you,
within the
Dylan
Fallout
Switzerland.
series.
I've liked
this
to sub to
installment
your
so
channel.
Special is that it's the first multiplayer game within the series. Fallout 76 would see a release date of November 14th,
Yeah, and it was good too.
2018.
It was really
now,
good.
Due to this being the first multiplayer installment within the series, there was a lot of anticipation and excitement
It was
behind
good
its
like
release.
Diablo. It
I
had
vividly
good
remember the
connectivity.
day that this game actually got announced, and I remember
Very
how excited
multiplayer,
I was
very,
because
very
I was on Twitter
multiplayer
at the time
game.
and had
I liked
saw
it.
that the trailer had came out. Me and my friends growing up actually really enjoyed playing these games within the series.
I like to sub
due
to your
to
channel.
its single player experience
Dylan
of just being in
Switzerland.
an open world wasteland where you can pretty much do whatever you want. I vividly remember me and my friends having conversations during Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas talking about how we would love to see if Bethesda released a multiplayer title where you could link up with your friends and do the same thing you're doing in these games, but just on a grander level with friends. Me and my friends weren't the only ones that felt this way though. You see, Fallout offers a unique single-player experience, and if you've been playing these games over the years, you could only wish for a multiplayer title. And at this point in 2018, it actually seemed like Bethesda had actually heard our prayers. Despite Fallout and Bethesda just in general being known for all the bugs and glitches within their games, it was safe to say that we were still excited for a multiplayer title. I was actually at a friend's birthday dinner when the trailer had got released. I opened Twitter and I watched the trailer, and I was actually blown away. Like, I was so excited for this game because it was finally time for a multiplayer Fallout title with new characters, new map, new locations, new weapons, new setting, new time frame, all that good stuff. Back in November of 2018, the anticipation was so high for Bethesda releasing Fallout 76. However though, instead of a smooth descent into the Appalachian wasteland, players were met with a barrage of bugs and glitches as usual. One of the main disastrous problems at launch for this game was the fact that it had no NPCs on the map. So you're playing an open world action RPG shooter and there's no NPCs. There's literally just robots patrolling the wasteland. Here's some gameplay of the game literally at launch.
What the fuck,
Wait, take the clothes off. We gotta see how it deformed you.
Oh man. That end though.
What the fuck?
Oh no, those guys are back. Run! Run! What? want that.
To replace your camp. However, hello?
I don't know. No, no, no. Está nadando. Está nadando.
We all know that games like have bugs and glitches here and there, and that's normal. But at this rate, it doesn't make any sense because not only was the game broken on launch with no NPCs, nothing to do, a dead wasteland, you also just had a barrage of glitches and just games crashing and people teleporting and quest progress being lost, and literally whole files just being deleted and forcing players to start from the absolute beginning of the game all over again. So combine all these issues of the game running on top of a disastrous world with nothing in it that feels like an actual wasteland and it's just completely empty, it doesn't make a good launch at all.
But as the fallout settled, the issues persisted. Many found the gameplay to be lacking with a narrative that failed to capture the depth of the previous Fallout titles like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4. Fans were disappointed, I was disappointed, and the game faced harsh criticism from both players and critics. Now, this is where things sort of take a turn because Bethesda, to their credit, didn't actually abandon the game. They rolled up their sleeves, they sort of listened to the community, and began a series of updates and patches. Almost immediately, Bethesda began putting out patches for their game, fixing a ton of issues that were affecting the overall experience for the players playing the game. Some of these updates would include like simple things such as increasing the stash limit that players can hold, your icon displays, the way enemies behave, the way they attack you, their attacking patterns, power armor updates, server maintenance, camp crafting workshops, all these things that kind of should have been added in the game originally, that should have just been in the base game, but due to the game just having a horrible launch and them probably not working on what they should have been working on, they ended up putting these into the game after the community complained about how horrible the launch was. There's a ton of updates that were also included in the beginning, but I won't go over all those because there's just so many to go through, and they're pretty basic things that should have been in the game originally. But following up after those basic updates and small patches and things like that, Bethesda would gear up to start launching huge updates and DLC add-ons for their game. Now, these updates would offer a lot of content for the game to make up for the lack of content at launch. With these updates, they were also patching and fixing more things that should have been fixed at the beginning of the game, but the main focus of these updates were to bring new content, new characters, new stories, new factions, new story arcs, new places to explore, new weapons, new drops, new loot, new skins, and changes to the item shop. This is where things really started to take a turn for the game, and there were still a bunch of problems within the game, don't get me wrong, but this is where the community started to be like, okay, Bethesda's not giving up on the game, they're going to add more things to the game for us to do, and hopefully, with these add-ons, it will improve the game for better and not for worse. I just want to take a quick second to look at every single add-on from the beginning of the game up until now, just so you guys can get a glimpse of how much content they added along in this game. So first up, we have the Wild Appalachia update. This is the first major update for Fallout 76, and it offered a new series of quests, features, events, and crafting systems. Then we have the Nuclear Winter update, June 10th, 2019. This update changes the rules of the Wasteland. April 14th, 2020, Wastelanders update. This update included a new main quest line, new factions, new events, and new features, and even more surprises and Easter eggs. June 30th, 2020, the Legendary Run update. This introduced a new way to progress through Fallout 76, introducing a Battle Pass-like feature for the game, item bundles, perk card packs, and unique cosmetics for the item shop. September 15th, 2020, One Wasteland for All. This update actually rebalanced the combat system in the game and the reward scale to your level so that players at different levels can easily team up to experience the world together. November 21st, 2020, Still Dawn, 6th major update for Fallout. This introduced new NPCs, new quest lines, a whole entire new story arc with the Brotherhood of Steel returning to Appalachia, and introduced new companions. April 27th, 2021, Locked and Loaded, the 7th update for the game. This contained an all-new season, scoreboard rewards, special loadouts, camp slot features, and a major expansion for the daily ops in the game. Shortly after July 7th, 2021, we have Still Reign. This update actually picked up on the storyline of where Still Dawn left off. Actually, just want to add in real fast that I personally have played the Brotherhood of Steel quest lines in Fallout 76, and it's some of my favorite quests throughout the whole entire game.
The voice acting in this game is actually really on par, and it made the world feel more alive when I was doing those quests. September 8th, 2021, 9th major update introducing Fallout Worlds.
You did this last time
just
too.
added private
And
worlds
I'm
so
gonna
players
die
could
because of
link
it.
up
Come
with
on.
their friends and still do the same missions,
Come on.
share loot, things like that, and also added another expansion to the daily ops within the game. December 8th, 2021, 10th major update, introducing Night of the Moth. This introduced the Mothman Equinox seasonal event, color settings for the Pip-Boy, and quality of life changes to the looting and public events within the game. Next major update, March 1st, 2022, Invaders from Beyond, the 11th major update. This introduced a whole entire new seasonal event for the game called Invaders from Beyond, and this also
I'm
had the
not
option
running
for
back
backpacks
here.
to be hidden for players when you're in a custom or a public game. June 14th, 2022, Test Your Metal update, introducing several new public events to the game for players and upgrades to the Fallout First scoreboard if you are a member of Fallout First. September 13th, 2022, the Pit update. This was actually introduced in Fallout 3, but then they added it to Fallout 76, which is an overrun city in Pennsylvania crawling with monsters, mutated monstrosities, and other threats like that. There was a ton of opportunities for players and dangers that awaited in this new area. December 6th, 2022, Nuka World on Tour update. This update introduced new events for players in the game and new regional bosses offering more drops, more loot, and just basically more things to do for players. February 28th, 2023, Mutation Invasion. This is the 15th major update for the game. This introduced mutations to public events, and I want to say this also introduced the fact that your player could also get mutations in the game, offering you a extremely positive bonus, but also having a negative bonus to your character's traits, just to keep it balanced out. June 20th, 2023, Once in a Blue Moon update. This update offered new cryptids, new public events, side quests, rewards, and more daily ops mutations. December 5th, 2023, Expeditions Atlantic City update. This update is actually being introduced in 2 waves. So the first one, December 5th, 2023, and then the next one is going to be this year in March of 2024, called America's Playground. To be honest, I am not too sure what these updates are offering, but I will be looking further into them because I am debating on playing Fallout 76 again. So here we are, 17 major updates later, adding a ton of content.
He's like doing a video for a game he doesn't play. To a wasteland the industry has lost its heart. YouTube has lost its heart, especially video games. Some of these people, they're like doing fucking videos for games they don't even bother to play. What? You don't think you should maybe leave that for somebody who actually likes the game?
Within it, as the sun sets over the irradiated hills of the Appalachian.
And yeah, this is just. Yeah, go back to the start. Oh no.
Bethesda keeps ruining everything it touches.
Then looking back at this new Skyrim update, many of the previous UI or even sometimes crashing
I'd like to
issues
sub to your
associated
channel,
with this new menu have now been
Quasar77.
resolved. So if you are somebody who is using this menu to browse for mods, whether that be free or paid, the entire experience should be a lot smoother and more usable now.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm surprised Bethesda actually fixed that. Not allowed someone to make a mod that fixes the crashes for them and sell that for money so they can get a little bit more. But honestly, hey, it only took Bethesda, what, a month-ish to fix this? That's almost like light speed for Bethesda. Usually they just don't fix it. But what a time to be alive. When it comes to making money in microtransactions, Bethesda's on the job, boys. Don't you worry about that. Anything else? No, let the modders fix it and put it in the shop for money and make us a little bit of that sweet, sweet green stuff. Oh man, you gotta hand it to Bethesda. What an absolute atrocious company.
Controller users even got some slight control changes, which does seem like a nice quality of life improvement. And for those of you playing on Steam, DRM is back for Skyrim. With the original Creations update, Bethesda accidentally broke the Steam integration, so this overlay wouldn't work.
What have they not broken? Every time Bethesda updates something, it introduces 20 new bugs and 5 new crashes. Every time Bethesda claims to fix a bug, it's not actually fixed, by the way. And they introduced a new bug. This is crazy. It's